thinking, okay, so
Yeah.
that's the glitch.
Can finish my cake.
And eat it too. So they might not. John P. I mean,
We're up. We're good? Okay. Welcome, everybody. This is Wednesday, November 6th, and it must be the Board of Commissioners' regular meeting. Up first, we're going to ask for additions or deletions to the agenda to get us started. John, you got that teed up for us?
For the purpose of
Discussing a request for the BOCC's grant of an easement over county property.
Right.
For access even to a different property. And that would be, well, we'll do a motion.
We'll have a motion at the time. Got it. That's it. Okay.
do we need to amend
do
our
we need to amend the
agenda
agenda?
to add exec session?
Oh, do we need to vote on that?
I will amend the agenda to add exec session at the end of the day.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you.
Otherwise, no change, no other changes.
No other changes. All right, and it's time for public comment. If you're here to make a comment, please come on up. You have to come up and sit at the table and make sure the red light's
Okay,
on your mic.
Let me give you this first.
Thank you. I can pan these out. Is this
It's
one
just
copy or?
one.
Okay,
Just
well,
one.
then we're gonna send it
This is
around.
Jeanette.
And what that is,
Come have a seat. You've gotta come and identify yourself.
okay,
For us,
Scott McDonald, I have 1000 East Cooper Street, Victorian, and that was my family home where I grew up in. Any case, I'd been going through the appeal board for property tax assessment, and I reached a point where I petitioned the State Board of Assessment Appeals, and that's what that document is that I gave you, and it has exhibits on it. And basically what it is the real crux of the matter is they're not comparing apples to apples, they're comparing apples to oranges. And also, the spreadsheet that they use for adjustment, property valuation, the fair market value, is totally shoot from the hip, arbitrary, and it's self-explanatory in the verbiage. I don't want to go into much of the details in it because it's quite detailed. Any case, I just wanted to make sure that you'd seen this. Have you seen this or been aware of it
No, I don't think hasn't come before our board.
at all? But it should have come before you, and it went before Jack Mooser. And my son presented it, and it was a pretty comprehensive presentation.
It came through our packet of information when we
Okay.
moved these forward.
Right.
But I don't know if all his appeal processes were part of that at the time? They were, okay.
Okay, so Jeanette's gonna put it into our public record, what you've given us.
Well,
and we'll-
I recorded, I
Yeah.
left a copy off, and I had a, receipt thing on it that, a receipt stamp that it was submitted, should be available to you. I don't know if you'd seen it or cruised through it or not. But it is significant in that I'm not new at this with tax abatement. Patty can testify to. And anyway, I had the same experience in Monoma County. That's a county for about 3 million people. And they were distorting the spreadsheet for the value adjustments, and they were shooting from the hip just this year. And it was serious enough that I went all the way to the Oregon Supreme Court in regards to it. And it was just one brick wall after another, but after about 5 years, we did it, and he was removed, the head assessor of Multnomah County for Portland and all the surrounding places. And I'm just looking at this, and the thing that I'm looking for in the assessor's office is, first of all, transparency and justification for valuation, which I didn't get. And we even asked for, the justification, they should have some, finally we got the spreadsheet, which is deficient. And they said to my son, Will, that, no, we don't have that for you. And then on the subsequent one with Jack, we've lowered it down, but when we asked for Jack's justification, his worksheet on it, I didn't get it. And so, it can't, it really hurts people that can't be vocal like I am. And I think that they need to be a little bit more accountable, transparent, and try to have a little bit better spreadsheets that really accommodate, especially Victorians. Our Victorian hasn't been touched. And we've had it for like 56 years. And there's no foundation to it. It's cinder block on a 2-inch sill of mortar. There's not a straight board in the place. And plus, I'm having an issue with the city on, they've taken the Buchanan survey, which I found that after some sleuthing around, and Tony Wagner even wrote about it, that there's a 3-degree difference between the Willits map, basically, and and it's a big deal, especially when you're on a 30 by 100 foot property. Right. And so there's this impingement of the street on us, and also the GIS overlay shows that the street is around 83 feet. There's approximately a 7-foot plus differential in the what they should be. All the streets should be 75 feet. If they're not 75 feet, then somebody, either the city is getting something they shouldn't have, or somebody else is getting something that the city should have.
And you're in the county? You're just outside the city, or are you in the city?
In the
You're
city.
in the city, okay.
So, but it's germane in that it's, as far as for FAR valuation, this is really a tear down. And just like Sue Lum's was. And this isn't reflected in here about the costs that are incurred going through community development's process of the HPC. It's like the insurance companies, it's $300,000 plus to go through it, 19-step process, which I put in there. So all of these things are not taken into account in the valuation. And also the impingement and the differential between their comparison in land valuations, it's just egregious. I go into it in detail, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood it. And yeah, there is a big deal brewing on the Buchanan versus historic overlay.
Got it. Well, thank you,
plat.
Scott. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
We've received it now. We know about this.
You know about it.
Thanks
you
for calling
got
our
it in your
attention.
hands.
I have a question, though.
Sure.
So have you had any follow-up then with the assessor's office as to your request for documents or anything, and maybe that's something
No,
we
I
can-
haven't. I put some emails back there. We tried to get them, and this is what I've submitted to the State Board of Assessment Appeals. I've asked for an audit because I think it's too egregious to start doing this. This is what I saw in Multnomah County, and it shouldn't stand.
All
So
right.
maybe this is something, John,
We're going to
that we
follow
could
up.
follow
We got to
up.
keep moving today, but
Okay.
thank you for
Well,
coming.
thank you very
Caroline,
much.
thank you
Nice
for
to see
coming
you
in.
guys. Nice to
Thanks
see
for
you.
saying hello.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And thanks for bringing that forward. Do we have any other public comment today? Seeing none, I'm going to bring it to the commissioners.
Real quick.
Comments? Patty?
Yeah, so I just wanted to remind people that they are making snow, which is great. And I want people again, and I noticed there was an article in the paper, I think yesterday, about please be careful if you're skiing any of the mountains, uphill or downhill, or both. because the conditions are sketchy, but there's also equipment and workers out there trying to get the season ready to roll. So please be careful out there, but enjoy.
Other comments? Steve, then Kelly?
The new bells have arrived at St. Mary's just this morning. There are 3 bells. I got to ring all 3 of them. They are absolutely beautiful. Just ringing them with a rubber mallet. They're going to have a blessing of the bells at 5 o'clock today at St. Mary's, right by the rectory. And then on Friday, the crane will come and lift them up into place
Cool.
in the tower.
Wow.
But we don't know where the old bell's going, right?
They think they're going to leave the old bell in there. That's what they were talking about.
Kelly?
Yeah, I want to thank our clerk's office for working late into the night, counting all the late ballots that voters returned yesterday. And also to thank the electorate for very overwhelmingly supportive of our 1A tobacco tax initiative.
What was the final percentage, do we know?
I was just
don't-
looking that up. It was
78.
77, 78, yeah. It was
We really appreciate that.
perhaps the highest that Nan Sundin said she's seen for an issue like that. And I just wanted to thank our Board of Health for all the work they did, and our Pitkin County Public Health staff that did a lot of support, and everyone else who went out. George wrote a great
That was a
op-ed.
great op-ed, George.
And thank you all for making this happen.
Thanks for doing that.
That's all I've got. George?
Yeah, just to, and also thank the unsung heroes, which are all of our election judges. Who spent no
Turn your
less
mic
than
on.
14 hours, no less than 14 hours yesterday monitoring the election. So thank you for volunteering, all the election judges.
And for Kelly for bringing them breakfast.
Right,
When
great.
when I left last night, someone was bringing them dinner.
It makes you realize, even in an off-election year, the importance of voting. Somebody asked me what my estimate would be of what would be the turnout, and honestly, I had no idea. And if you get better than 30%, that's a good thing. Think, wow, we really are. Are we lazy over here? Let's hope at the 2020 election there'll be a much bigger turnout, and I'm sure there will.
Sure there will be.
But it's necessary. It's necessary. It's not only a right, but it's a responsibility. So thank you, everyone who did vote. I was going to offer that we could only accept public comment from people who voted, but you probably wouldn't let me do that. Okay, moving right along, we're going to consent items, minutes of the regular meeting of October 23rd. I need
Move to approve.
I have a motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And then emergency ordinance, first reading, granting an easement to Holy Cross Energy and approving a trench conduit and vault agreement with Holy Cross Energy. And we've got airport guys here.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Wylock, Director of Security and Landside Operations. This is Chris Padilla, our
Airport
controller.
controller. How you guys doing?
We see Chris over here a lot. Welcome.
Thank you. So our recommended action is to approve an emergency ordinance granting an underground right-of-way easement to Holy Cross Energy and approve a trench conduit and vault agreement with Holy Cross for our interim terminal improvement project with Aspen Pitkin County Airport, and set for a confirmatory reading and public hearing on November 20th.
Okay. Any questions? Anything else you want to tell us? George?
What's it all about? I mean,
So with the terminal improvement project, we're putting in a modular building, which is the relocation of the admin offices. To do that, we need more power, and so the easement is to give access for Holy Cross to put in a conduit line, so we have a direct power source to be able to provide the power for that modular building, a baggage tent, and facilities on that side of the airport campus.
The board may recall that we had previously indicated that the transformer on site that's currently serving the facility did not have any more capacity. So in order to make the interim improvements, we've had to pull a line, I believe, from the other side of Highway 82. Is that right, or is it in the existing right-of-way? We're having to pull a new line with a different source. One of the benefits of doing that right now is it is allowing us to pull over some additional electricity that will allow us to put in some chargers for electrified ground service equipment. Is that right, or what's the right term for that? I think it's ground service equipment, which we'll hope to be able to negotiate with the airlines in the future. But this will be for the parking lots, it'll be for the tent, it'll be for the admin facilities, all the extra power that we're needing to pull across for that.
It really comes down to a capacity issue. We just don't have enough power to add anything. So for this addition or this improvement to be able to have the appropriate power.
So since this is going to be available to the parking lots, at some point, we would be able to put in some recharging stations there?
We have enough for 5 chargers, is my understanding. And
can
right
declare
now, we
victory.
think the most likely use of those, George, would probably be for ground service equipment. But we haven't made plans just yet for implementing that because we just learned that we would have that extra juice with pulling this line.
Good start.
It's a good start. Thank you. This is the direction I think that I certainly wanted to see us move in, and if there's an opportunity to put in extra capacity now without creating extra cost, it's a great opportunity. So
I agree.
Steve?
Well, I think more importantly, this is allowing us to expand the secure area in the airport for the public.
Correct. And it's a safety issue.
The administrative office won't be probably in quite as nice of a facility as it is now, but it's a necessary measure to get through the interim period here.
It was a good win.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Question. The attachments, the easement and vault agreement attachments, they don't look like they're our normal form, so I just want to confirm that the attorney's office has reviewed and approved those.
2 days ago, I think it was.
Probably.
Thank you.
Pass the test. Thanks for asking. I'm looking for a motion then, or is there more conversation to be had here?
I will move to approve and set for second reading, public hearing for confirmation of an emergency ordinance on November the 20th.
Second?
We have second. Any other conversation on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Should have said confirmatory, not confirmation. We're not going to church, right?
Same deal.
I noticed there was a frown in Ely, but kind of like, what is she talking about?
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Sorry to make you wait. Take a piece of cake on your way out. Courtesy of Pat Bingham upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Elaine.
You know,
Uh,
some things I read with a fine tooth
That was a
comb,
joke.
and some things I don't.
All right, what are you all sitting there for? What are we doing here anyway? This is individual consideration items set for public hearing November 20th. This is an ordinance accepting Juniper Hill donations parcel. Dale will in the slot,
Hi,
in the
Dale.
chute.
Hi.
He's getting his pocket drive out of his pocket.
Let's see what happens.
I'll put a map up just because Michael Owsley would appreciate that, so.
We're thinking of you, Michael.
How do I get to the,
Do you have a fire extinguisher handy whenever they plug in? I'm worried
Thumb
whenever they
drives?
plugs into the computer, either it shuts off.
how
or-
do I find
Oh, the systems go.
the button where I
Okay,
can
John's here.
get my thumb drive to?
D-Tech.
Just hit.
Is that really your password? Oh my God.
Just broadcast nationally.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Juniper Hill in Brush Creek Village.
Right. I'm Dale Will, the acquisition manager for Pitkin County Open Space and Trails, and we have been offered as a gift this parcel of land that's up on Juniper Hill Drive up in Brush Creek Village. The map of the property is now up, and you can see that this whole area, a good half of the property, has got a wetland on it. And notwithstanding that, our community development department was able to find a place to approve a building envelope clear over here on the side of the property, but frankly, it's not a great building envelope, and it is a beautiful high altitude wetland. Our resident ecologist, Liza Mitchell, has been up there to verify that it has all the characteristics of a wetland with the sedges and whatnot. And if there are any questions about the science of high altitude wetlands, we can have Liza come up and
come on up.
regale us. Sure.
Hello, Liza Mitchell, Open Space and Trails Natural Resource Planner and Ecologist. I did a site visit up there during the summer. There are a lot of weeds as well, a lot of wetland plants, including sedges, which can only live in areas that are typically inundated and saturated soils. So that's a pretty clear indicator of wetland habitat. And it runs, there's a little creek that sort of runs through there, and it seems to be fairly perennial. Continues down, and I was not able to go all the way up and down the creek because of private property, but it seems like it could be a good corridor for wildlife to move through that area, that neighborhood.
Patty?
Any orchids?
I was going to ask that.
No orchids that I found.
Found yet? Okay, we'll keep
Yeah.
looking.
Okay, send me that.
I had a question, just technical question. I always confuse a sedge from a grass. What's
Ooh.
the square
Here's the
versus
trick.
round?
Sedges have edges, so when you
This is the stuff.
let's edify everybody here. When you roll them between your fingers, it feels like triangular, whereas rushes, which are another wetland plant, are round. Grasses are also round, but grasses typically have seed heads that sort of bend back over. So
They're blowing the breeze.
sedges have edges, rushes are round, grasses have lashes that reach to the ground.
Okay, that's excellent, thank you.
Never forget.
I know, that's good.
Thinking of you on
That was
every
our,
night.
our rhyme for the
Teaching my
day.
daughter that this evening at
There you
dinner.
go.
Yeah, you tell your kids this. I'll tell mine. Thank you. No orchids yet, but we'll be on the lookout for orchids and boreal toads and unicorns and stuff up there.
I happen to have a picture of
So-
an orchid I found down there, one of my, I'll have to show it.
George?
This is like Ranger Rick here.
I know.
I don't want to interrupt
Oh,
Dale.
no, they're still going. What? You're
Well,
still going?
let me just wrap this by saying, so the owner of this property, they do have it listed, but the owner's in a position to make a donation and treat this as a charitable gift for their tax purposes. We did run this past the Brush Creek HOA and didn't receive any response really, so I took that as a sign there's not an objection. It's unusual for open space and trails to suggest we would want to own a lot that's inside of a subdivision, but because high altitude wetlands, I'm told, are fairly rare and do generate ecosystem benefits, although there's mixed views at the staff level. On balance, the open space board felt that this was worth accepting this as a gift. It's nice when someone in the community has the desire to donate a piece of property to us. And the open space board voted unanimously to recommend that we accept this.
Great, thanks for that.
So Dale, do we have will Open Space be doing a management plan on this property and looking at any long-term goals?
Well, we can certainly put it in our management planning roster. That roster is pretty deep, and I've gotten in trouble for making commitments about how soon that could happen. But in the near term, the property doesn't have anything on it that needs management other than the weeds that Liza mentioned. So we will be looking at how to address that because we're not expending open space dollars on this acquisition. It is a piece of property that the county could reconvey a partial interest in it. If we found someone that, like the HOA, that wanted to own this and we could simply reserve a conservation easement, that would be an approach as well. So we'll be managing it along with all of our other open space parcels. And if a decision is made to retain it as a permanent piece of open space and fee simple absolute, then we'd be looking at some kind of a management plan for it.
All right, thanks. Questions? Kelly and then Steve?
Sure, yeah, I have a couple questions. I guess in our memo, these are characterized as rare type of wetlands, and I just would like to understand that a little bit more. Are there other areas where wetlands like this exist that you could point to, or?
Sure, I think in the bigger picture, riparian areas and wetlands are 1% of the land area in Colorado, and yet there's 80% of wildlife require that for some part of their life history. Right? They might not live in the riparian or wetland habitat the entire time, but they require that. And so typically, really any opportunity across the state, a lot of different organizations just, in general, that's a higher priority type of habitat to preserve than others.
Mm-hmm. And are there other areas, either in this subdivision or kind of in the nearer county-wide, that there's kind of similar wetland existing?
Yes, yeah, I think basically anywhere along a creek where it flattens out, you have that water start to pool up and create more wetlands rather than like an active channel. And I haven't mapped those out extensively, but.
One of our most famous wetlands in the open space system that I'm aware of is at Faloha Meadows, where you have that big, it's actually a warm wetland.
With the orchids.
With the orchids and fireflies in it.
And North Star is another example of large wetlands. So a lot of the larger ones, we do know where they are, and these smaller ones, you serve proportionally smaller services, but are just as important.
And then, do we know are there any water rights upstream from this that could impact whether this remains a wetland that we know of, so that could dry that out in the future?
We didn't undertake to analyze that. All the times I've been up there, there's been water actually flowing through the road cut that's up here where the Juniper Hill Drive cut into the wetland soils. So as Liza said, the water seems to be perennially flowing through there. But whether there's anything upstream in that hydrologic zone that could impact that, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It could be groundwater seeps that are contributing some of that flow also, just based on where it is. But
That'd be something I think to look into for second read, maybe. That's a really good question.
And then I just have a last question. I have a little concern about this, I'll just preface, but so what code protections exist should we decide not to accept this donation if someone wanted to build on this lot?
Well, as I mentioned, ComDev did review a development application on this property and created a building envelope that would have a driveway and a potential residential construction happen over here. So to that extent, the county code does prohibit development approvals within a wetland. So you might say that that code has done its job. Open space, well, myself personally as open space staff member and the open space board both felt that having a little bit more of a buffer here on an ecological feature like that's not a bad thing, especially when it's being offered to us at no purchase price.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that, though, too? The other thing for me is that if in the future we decided we could, as you already said, Dale, that we could do a conservation easement and sell off the property for some kind of development, but also creates and will facilitate and enhance, I think, the habitat for those who need to use that riparian area, or the wetlands area for some part of their lifespan. To allow them to have something that doesn't have a building envelope, a building right there in the face of it. So I think that That's a real positive for me. And it is unusual, being in the middle of a subdivision, for us to look at a parcel, but obviously it's an exceptional parcel, because who would ever think there'd be a wetlands in Brush Creek?
Right, yeah, it's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
I was gonna just to add on to that, the wetlands are usually, the corridors like that are where you see a lot of wildlife mobility. So my guess is you have elk and deer and foxes and bobcats, and even the mountain lions from above probably traverse through that area on their way up and down. Coyotes go through there on their way down to look at Cozy Point, to look at the chickens. And
Likely so, and then you can see where there's that extra circle area. There's an aspen stand in there too, so it's got interesting cover near right in that wet area as well.
And the hillside where the building envelope would be identified as I don't know what the grade is, but that's a steep hillside they'd be building on there. So I'm happy enough to see that one left for the wildlife. Steve?
So 2 thoughts. Just because it's a small parcel doesn't mean it can't have some real value. And all you have to do is look at the Dottie Fox open space, which is about, I think, a 1/4 acre. Is a very nice place for the public to go and look at the view and sit on the bench there. So just because it's only a couple of acres doesn't mean it can't have some good value. Also, is there any measurable water flow in the wetland during any times of the year? My thought is that someone else could come in and file for a water right on the water that is creating the wetland and actually tap into the water and take it to another property. So I think part of the management plan should look at that, the possibility of actually filing for a water right on the water that's creating the wetland, just to protect it forever.
And I rely heavily on
Something to consider and
to
consult
help
with
us with those
our
kinds
attorneys
of
on
goals.
that.
So.
Merits further study. I wouldn't want to vote that we make that contingent on the acceptance of it, but I would, certainly, you'll be up there looking at it, I know. Any other comments or questions?
I do have one last thing.
Patty?
In Kelly's question about the water rights that may exist above that could pull the water, I don't know how difficult it would be to look into that by second reading, but if possible, I think that's a really good question. So it's something we just might want to clarify, if there's some existing water right that could draw from that. I'm not the water rights expert here at the table. I'm looking at him and he's trying to avoid my glance.
Notes to myself. Deep in thought.
So maybe if we could bring some more information back on that at second reading, I think that would be great, and I would make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Steve had another comment. Do you want
No,
to second?
I'll second it.
Oh, Steve seconded it?
So
Any
second
further?
reading and public hearing is on the 20th of November.
Great, thank you. And Kelly?
I'll just comment that I do have concerns about this, about accepting kind of an isolated in-holding for the staff to manage. We didn't mention that was noted in the packet that there is a weed concern on this parcel that would require effort to mitigate. So I'm happy to move this forward to second reading, but not convinced yet.
And I would suggest, I'm going to look at Steve on this one. This might be a great parcel for some small volunteer weed pull, because we know we need to be careful with people tromping through wetlands. But it might be such that this would be a great site for our land management people to come in and help the open space and trails do a collaborative effort here and do some kind of really carefully managed educational weed pull.
Great idea.
I'm
Steve?
not going to spray it.
I
So.
presume there are Canada thistle on there, which we pull. It's futile to go and pull Canada thistle.
Yeah, but we don't want to be spraying right next to a wetland, so I think we need to be very careful with that.
But for sure, that could be looked at. That would need an integrated weed management plan for it.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for the sedge education.
I'll get you that picture of my orchid
Thanks
I
for the
found.
sedge
Sedges have edges.
This education.
Sedges have
Weeds
edges.
around, and
Weeds around, and
grasses have lashes that touch the
Lashes that reach
ground.
to the ground.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay. And Dale's still here. You're still here.
Still here.
Up next, we have the approval of the North Star Conservation Easement Amendment.
Correct.
You love to-
And you will recall in the last few meetings, I think in September, we discussed and you all approved a boundary agreement with the State Highway Department to correct an error in the legal description on the North Star Nature Preserve. The same legal description that we were correcting with that prior action also affects the conservation easement that the county conveyed to the Aspen Valley Land Trust on the North Star Nature Preserve. So this ordinance in front of you would simply approve an amendment to that conservation easement that is consistent with the prior approval of the boundary agreement with CDOT. It removes a little bit of land along the edge of North Star. The boundary agreement removed that from the legal description of what we own outright, and this ordinance would authorize the same legal description to be substituted for the current boundary description in the conservation easement. The Aspen Valley Land Trust Board has fully approved this, and Rye has looked at the form of the correction deed that AVLT would like to use to simply take this line that's shown on this map that's been surveyed for us and is subject to a pending approval with CDOT and put that line into the legal description so that we don't have AVLT holding a conservation easement on the state highway.
On the other hand, if we had a conservation easement on the highway, they wouldn't be able to put up those obnoxious signs, would they?
Right, maybe the Aspen Valley Land Trust could shut that highway down and we'd be, quiet would return to the upper Roaring Fork.
Comments, questions? We've seen this before. I'm looking for a motion if we don't have any.
I'll make a motion to approve, set for second reading and public hearing on 11/20.
Second.
We have a
Thanks for
second.
cleaning that up, Dale.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have an ordinance adopting the Moore Open Space Management Plan. And Lindsay's here. Welcome.
We have the whole crew.
Lindsay. Liza,
Do you want to switch spots in your computer?
are there orchids on this piece of property?
Not that we're aware of. Should start.
But you never know.
But it is beautiful habitat in other ways. Yes.
All kinds of critters out there, that's for sure.
Okay. I'm Lindsay Etter. I'm the Planning and Outreach Manager for Open Space and Trails. We are here for the Moore Management Plan. In particular, the 2001 plan that this is updating was adopted by the Board of County Commissioners at that time, and then this new plan has a regulation in it to keep users on the trail, which is not included in Title 12 currently, and so therefore we need to come to the board for approval as well. So at the October Open Space and Trails Board meeting, the board recommended the management plan that you have in your packet for approval to the Board of County Commissioners. We began a planning process earlier this summer with we had an open house and site visit days out there with the public. We also partnered with the City of Aspen for some outreach days and events because they are also working on the Merle Open Space, which is across the pedestrian bridge from Moore Open Space. I think the quick thing, the short answer to what we learned from the public is that people love more open space just the way it is, which is great. So what this plan does is acknowledges the existing uses out there, allows for a couple tweaks on the Nordic alignment in particular, and then puts into place some, in particular, habitat projects with the weed management and the restoration efforts, as well as limitation of users to the trail. So I thought do you want to go, we'll focus on the action items that are in the plan. Hopefully everyone's been to more open space. It is a beautiful little oasis surrounded by much of the city of Aspen at this point, but it still is a important habitat area, a unique habitat area out there with the mountain big sagebrush that used to occur everywhere, and now this is kind of one of the last little inholdings of what was left in that habitat, at least around Aspen. And so in our plan, we try to do what we can to preserve and maintain that. So the first action item focuses on the weed management. We have done, I don't know if we have a stat on how many gallons we have sprayed out there, but we have done a massive effort, especially since that 2001 management plan, to get the noxious weeds under control. There's still a lot of work to be done, but there's been a lot of success out there with the weed management, so we want to continue that effort, as well as look at how we can encourage the native habitat to continue to thrive. So looking at what we can do with reseeding, things like that. The next action item is just our vegetation and wildlife monitoring. So every 5 years, kind of going in and checking to see what our trends are over time as far as our vegetation and wildlife reports. The action item about working with the adjacent landowner kind of speaks to the idea that the fact that more open space is surrounded by private properties. In particular, the one to the west is our connection to the creek bottom as well, and really important, the use on more and that connection to the creek is very important. So trying to continue to work with that adjacent landowner in the future, trying to maintain that wildlife connectivity as well as weed management so that the more open space can continue to have that connection to the creek bottom. We did meet, just so you're aware, we met with representatives for that adjacent property owner during the planning process and had some good conversations about that. So it's something that we'll just continue to work with them on in the future. What's the next one, Jesse? The next section focuses on the recreation. The Moore acquisition had specific language in there about the Nordic, and I guess maybe if you want to focus on the Nordic part, or in the maps, yeah. The Nordic use in particular, and then the summer use. So in the management plan, we call out specifically continuing to work with the Nordic program on the Nordic alignments, working with them on if there's areas we need to tweak so that they hold snow longer into the season, as well as the proposed Nordic connection, which was discussed at the Open Space and Trails Board meeting. It's represented with the dotted line on this map. But the Nordic Council requested there be a figure 8 opportunity out there. So the plan includes that option and working with our wildlife biologist on that. It does not allow for mowing. So it would have to occur when there's enough snow in a snow year. But the idea being that it would be winter use only and trying to keep the vegetation intact so that when there's not feet of snow out there, it's still functioning habitat. So we have started a little bit of work on that, but it will be something that will be a year-to-year conversation with the Nordic Council on if that is appropriate out there, given the snow. Then the next actually.
I had a question just regarding, on back to your trails, I see the photo with the bicyclists, and I'm wondering the south trail, which is the bicycle trail or
So in the summer use, so winter use, when it's groomed system, there is no bike. When it's not groomed, so we were trying to get away from summer, winter, depending on what that means with season shift. Bikes are allowed out there on the designated routes in this image. Keeping in mind that the easements going to the north do not currently allow summer use. They are only when there is a groomed Nordic system. And then the easements going to the south through the private property allow for that summer use on that designated route there.
So the easement is marked in orange on the map,
Correct.
just so we see.
Yep.
So there's the north easement, it's only winter, and then the south.
Yeah, there's a through the private property, there's a hatch pattern that's an easement. The orange is a license agreement, just to clarify. So it's a renewable thing, it's not a permanent easement. The yellow hatchet is the permanent easements. So we do have an action item in there working with the adjacent property owner and the city of Aspen in particular on trying to preserve the public connection through there. Because it's such an important winter and summer connection from the city towards the arc everywhere, really.
Got it. George had a question.
Yeah, so Lindsay, you started the presentation talking about how this is such a unique habitat area within the city of Aspen and certainly a wildlife refuge. So I'm not really sold on the idea of this proposed Nordic connection, even though I sit on the Nordic Council. I was not at those meetings. I ski over there on this property quite a bit, and it's a short loop. It's only about 3K loop as it is. And typically, whenever I'm skiing around there, I almost always see mule deer right in the center of this area, right where this area is being proposed. So I guess I'm not seeing a need to add a trail that will bisect this small property further and probably, not probably, but maybe disturb what wildlife are utilizing that as their winter grounds.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we originally did not have that in the plan. The staff was not recommending it. And then the board meeting, after board discussion with the Nordic comments that came in at that meeting, we added it into the plan. We had concerns about it bisecting that inner intact area.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, typically, we utilize a wildlife consultant whenever we're looking at uses of lands. And it seems like it may be more prudent to use a consultant for this coming winter and start doing some ground work to determine what's actually out there and the scope and the nature and the amount of wildlife there, and if there would be any negative impacts if at some point. Because is this scheduled to, depending on snow, to possibly be open this coming winter?
If it's in this management plan, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're jumping the gun a little bit. I mean, that's my personal feelings.
Yeah, I had raised concerns about that too because of the abundance of wildlife. I think we should continue to look at it, and it's my understanding that it may be a very infrequent use because of snowpack and because of the issue about maintaining the vegetation. It's not going to be mowed as a specific track prior to snowfall. It'll be dependent upon how much snow. If there's enough snow, then they'll track it. So I agree with George. I think it's something we should, I don't know how you want to address it in the management plan, something to be looked into in the future with a specific wildlife consultant's input before we actually open it up to use. You know, we want to keep those critters out there. And it's really, really an amazing space. And in your reference to the other trails and the adjacent neighbor, looking at the letter we received from Holland and Hart, those are the issues that were addressed in this letter. So we've addressed those many points that we received.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'm assuming it's the same letter. We only got one letter from them.
That's the one letter for the S&J investments.
Yep.
Thank you.
Kelly?
Sure. In the letter from the Nordic Council, they also asked for consideration for adding benches and picnic tables, and I wondered how staff reacted to that request.
So the original acquisition allowed for that specifically. It called it out. There was debate internally. Ultimately, we, I think, allowed for that discussion, but we weren't recommending it at this time just because the public likes it the way it is. Mm-hmm. But it's something that's allowed within the acquisition language on this particular property.
Thank you.
Steve?
Looking at the way people can get around from the subdivision to the north, during the winter they can ski on a trail, but the way it is now, if someone who lives there wants to go to the rec center in the summertime, they have to get in their car and drive around.
Correct. Legally, it is
And
not
so
allowed.
I think either trying to make that historic trail, what's shown as a historic trail, open in the summertime so people who live there would have the possibility of going over to the Ark without getting into their car, or doing the trail along the highway, which is mentioned also, the trail from the city of Aspen asked to maintain the right to do a trail from Buttermilk into town along that side of the highway. So they could go on that trail and then along a trail along Maroon Creek to get to the Ark also, with riding a bicycle or walking either way. So I think that should be looked at as one possibility, and there's a good reason for doing that, to keep people out of their cars as much as possible.
Yeah, so on action item 4.2.3, we specifically say we want to work with, there's two landowners, two properties that would really need to be part of that conversation. One is the subdivision to the north, and then one is the adjacent landowner to the west.
Yeah.
So trying to achieve that.
Also, the issue about the fat tire bikes in the winter and people walking their dogs in the winter, I think if there is a trail built along Highway 82 or along Maroon Creek Road, those two uses should be allowed on those trails right adjacent to the road. But I would agree to not allow them on the existing ski trails, because there are other alternatives nearby for both dog walkers and fat tire bikes.
Okay.
And then I have a question. What is a pump track?
Pump track is mainly for mountain bikes, but I don't know what the proper definition would be, but it's like a loop track that you can ultimately get through without pedaling.
Like a skills development.
There's one at like
With jumps and sharp turns and
yeah.
Cyclocross?
No, pump track is like I'm trying to think where there's one up valley. Is there one in Snowmass? There's one down like in Carbondale.
There's one in Snowmass, but yeah, it'll have features on it that are skill building for jumps or navigating obstacles and that sort of thing. So,
okay.
And they're usually pretty short, pretty small.
It's a loop.
Good for kids usually to learn on.
Not for senior citizens?
Or
Anybody.
either end of the spectrum. Sorry, Steve.
We don't want to see Steve or John out there.
Falling off is okay, hitting the ground is not.
Do you want me to continue just quickly summarizing the remainder of the
Please,
action items in
thank
there? Okay. So we the single track routes was kind of where we left off, which is 4.2.2. Again, just designating these are the routes, and this is where the public is allowed to be, so that we don't see any proliferation of additional trails. We just talked about the adjacent property trail easements and how those are very important to how more open space connections function. So continuing to work with those adjacent landowners and trying to achieve a long-term seamless system. The Maroon Creek Trail and then the south side of Highway 82 Trail were both requests from the city of Aspen. They're just looking long-term that in the future we may not be allowed to have a trail through the Aspen campus, the school campus, and that if that happens, where would that be appropriate? And if it's along Maroon Creek Road, that we preserve the opportunity to potentially use the little portion of more open space if needed. Same thing with the trail along Highway 82. There's a series of easements coming into town from Buttermilk already. And so in the future, if they move forward on that trail, if they need to use a portion adjacent to the right-of-way to make that trail work, that we're open to looking at that with them. So then for education, interpretation, and enforcement, so again, the rules and regs, Title 12 applies. The one thing that we are looking to do here that's not in Title 12 is the restriction of users to stay on designated routes at all times. The next couple of action items talk about implementing sign standards, and in particular education around the idea of why it's important for users to stay on the trail, respecting wildlife, that this is an area that the animals are there and present, and that being on the trail during fawning seasons in particular is important. And then our commercial and special use, In this acquisition, there was very specific language that commercial use was not allowed on more open space. So any permitted event out there is a special use. Any commercial for-profit entity is not allowed to use more open space. So we're just specifically identifying that in the plan. So that was it. Are there other questions about items?
I had a question, just when you're talking about use of the open space, say a photographer wants to go out and take a portrait of someone, you know, two people, they go out to take pictures, is that,
Not if they're a for-profit entity.
right, they'd have to get a or they couldn't do it?
They're not allowed, yeah.
Right, good question. And then, just the dog leash required, you know, I heard one comment about how maybe dogs should be limited to the periphery and not on the trails, but just looking at the, you know, does the signage pertain to that then, or are we currently open? It's currently open and intended to be open for dogs on leash,
So if there's a groomed Nordic system, dogs are not allowed.
for the groomed Nordic.
So
right.
if there's not a groomed Nordic system, dogs are allowed on a leash.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Rather than winter or summer, if we just do it by
I
whatever, it's
would
on the
just love to
ground.
say, I really appreciate the previous comments about, you know, let's be very careful with a proposed connection for the figure eight. If this is habitat, or if we're seeing a lot of wildlife activity there, I'd say, let's leave it alone. And that'd be my preference as well.
Okay.
But you've got it in there, and maybe in the future, there's future conversation about it, but it sounds like we'd need somebody to weigh in on what it means for wildlife. And that hasn't happened yet, I assume.
So we have gone, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
To kind of shield it to see if the red light's on.
You're on.
Now I am. Okay. So after the Open Space Board, I did meet with Jonathan Lowski, Colorado Wildlife Sciences, on site to walk the proposed route. Nordic Council went out and flagged what they were looking at and thinking about. And I would say about 3/4 of it is not very dense sagebrush. Rather, it's non-native grasses like smooth brome. And then 1/4 of it is pretty dense sagebrush habitat. Jonathan Lowski said that it's not ideal if we put in a trail, we're going to lose some habitat. However, restricted to winter, it is the best alignment possible. So they did, you know, if we're going to put in a figure eight, that's the shortest distance with the least amount of vegetation disturbance. I also visited the site with Nordic Council operations staff to sort of start to understand would it be possible to put this in without mowing, and it really depends on snow depth and snow level. So that's something that we don't have complete information on at this point, but that's the updates I have since our open space and trails board meeting, where we try to come up with this compromise of winter use only without mowing in order to enable a connection. So that's the progress we have made thus far.
So I would just add to 4.2.1 that prior to considering the opening of this connector, that the wildlife biologist does a winter study as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I have one really random one for you ladies.
And then, I'm sorry, and
Sorry, George.
then it goes on to saying approved by the Nordic Council and the Open Space and Trails Board. So does that mean that would not need to come back to the BOCC?
Under that paragraph? Or
Yes.
you're talking about a use change above?
Yeah, 4.2.1, it just says right now, it's evaluated by the OST's wildlife biologist and approved by the Nordic Council and Open Space and Trails Board.
Yeah, the way it's written, that was more pertaining to the tweaks of the system, like if they wanted to add bikes. So currently, no. The way it's written currently does not come back to BOCC, so we could amend that or change that.
So you would like it if they decide to do this Nordic loop to
Come
back to us first,
Yeah, everything, so I mean,
since it's our question.
To clarify, so we're talking the first paragraph? Or down here?
yes,
Yeah.
Okay, so that paragraph specifically was about foot, bike, and dog use not being permitted. So if they want to allow it,
no, I'm on 4.2.1, designated Nordic routes, use enhancements and maintenance.
So it
Great.
says approved by the Nordic
Am I?
Right, so that's addressing the foot, bike, and dog use, if we were gonna change any
Oh,
of
I
that.
see.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
allow, but we can. If
Oh,
you,
I
if
see
you
what you're
like.
saying. I'm sorry. I misread that. Okay, I was looking at the, just a connector.
Right.
Yeah.
So third paragraph.
But
Yeah.
George's point is that it would come back to BOCC.
Connector decision should come back to us since it's our question.
Or all of it, or whatever. We can add
I
you
would
guys.
agree with
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Okay.
Other comments?
Okay, so I do have this one. There was one letter received, and I know this is of great interest to everyone, about creating a green natural cemetery on the more open space. I just want to know how that was addressed and received by the Open Space and Trails Board. And I just thought it was interesting, that it was nice of this gentleman to submit this comment. But did we look into that in any way, shape, or form, or?
Well, so we didn't, the Open Space Board, we did not discuss it with. At the staff level, my initial thought when they read it was spreading of ashes, but then reading the letter, it's actually digging, disturbing the ground.
And putting in the corpse.
Yeah, and so the ground disturbance on that was something the staff didn't support.
Okay, so that, regardless of what was going in, we decided just not to disturb the ground at all. I mean, I'm not supporting it, I was just wondering how you followed up on
Yeah,
it.
it was an interesting comment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Steve?
How much does the Moore family have, do they have any say at this point in time as to what the management plan says for the property?
When we first started the planning process, they were concerned that there was going to be major changes, and we talked about during the acquisition, which was pretty unique. I haven't seen it on many. I can't think of another property that had these specific items outlined that could or couldn't happen there in the acquisition language. So we had a conversation about that. Ultimately, what say they have currently, it's owned by the county the county. So, but that being said, they were part of the outreach, and they also submitted a letter that we got at the last Open Space and Trails Board meeting supporting that Nordic connection, because their original intent was Nordic was one of the primary uses. So it was a public comment, just like any public comment we receive, but they don't necessarily have more say, I would say.
Okay.
More
Well,
say
I
on the
was-
more.
I was curious, and it was in relation to the Nordic Connector
Correct, yeah.
Trail that made me think of that. You can make a whole lot better Nordic Trail anywhere if it is actually mowed. You don't have to rely on, you can have 6 inches of snow and make a really good ski trail. If it's going through sagebrush, there would be no trail there until there's several feet of snow. So.
Right.
Okay.
That was the balance.
That's why I was
That was the
asking about
conversation.
how much say does the Moore family have, and do they have any more influence than just any other citizen at this point?
This point there.
Okay.
Kelly?
Is there a risk of the compaction from the grooming creating a de facto mode trail over time?
Well, it was part of the conversation was they wanted to roll it versus groom it versus nothing. So it felt like the conversation was that if we aren't mowing it, that vegetation may be compacted but can spring up. But I think it's a good question over time. Use
If we have
patterns
a
change
winter
vegetation
until
type.
June,
Yeah.
Exactly, and that will be something to address of how to then close a trail that people are used to using in the summer after they've been using in the winter, and it looks like a trail. So we don't know what that will look like yet, but that's a great question and concern. And
The unintended consequences.
Right.
yeah, any
Interesting.
vegetation removal will make it look more like a trail in any season, as well as human behavioral patterns. However, if you're not actually mowing in the spring or fall the way you are, if you've been out there recently and it's mowed, 15 to 30 feet wide, that would not be the case on this trail, and so it may look less like a trail, but we don't know.
We could always add a condition that the snow depth has to be at least sagebrush height before they can which it may have to be that way anyway.
My faith in recreation users is waning. Honestly.
Give it a couple more years.
I have to say, I love the idea of a ski trail that only appears on the appropriate year and not all the time. It's kind of, if you get a big year and you can ski it, it becomes something really special. The rest of the time, we leave it alone, leave it for the deer. I'm okay with that. Are we ready to entertain a motion on this, or is there more? What else you got? That's it.
That's it,
Thank
and
you.
we'll,
Good.
so
Really
the reflecting
appreciate
those
it.
changes, we'll edit that action item.
Right, and this is going to come back to us on the 20th of November for second reading.
I will make a
with the-
motion.
With the
With
changes.
those edits,
We have a
Jesse
motion
will
from
be here.
Patty.
Make a motion to
For a
approve.
second,
I'll second.
and a second from Kelly. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. That was a good,
Yeah.
great
It's a cool
looking
property.
presentation. No, it's
a beautiful
an
property.
amazing piece of property, and it's so great that we have that in our open space.
Deer we've had out this year, pretty
Portfolio.
awesome. Except
Yeah,
for the
I
ones
see
we
deer out
lost
there
on the
all the
road.
Okay, moving right along. Individual consideration items. This is public hearing, second reading. That's where we are. And this is the authorization of the Community Office for Resource Efficiency, CORE, to expend funds generated through the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, REMP. Mona and Cindy, you're here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mona's here to discuss any details with you, but this is your second and final reading of the resolution concerning the REMP funds and allocation of those funds for the annual core budget.
Okay.
Do you have any?
Presentation of any sort for us?
Any changes, any?
We had quite the presentation at first reading. Would you like an additional presentation on that? The board passed it on first reading.
Patty?
I think I'm pretty good with it, but, and then there's no changes that I noted in here. So I do have one thing that I want to carry forward that I am concerned, I think we all are, which was the intent of CORE and REMP when we first created this amazing organization and funding capacity, that at some point we would be getting what we wanted, which would be have people doing the right thing, which I think we're seeing that more and more, especially with the energy code changes. So I'm going to look at Mr. Peacock and the rest of the board here and say, for the beginning of the year when we do our board retreat, I'm hoping we can do it as soon as possible after the first of the year, because I think we have a lot of issues that have been moving forward the end of this year. I would like to see that we add looking at opportunities or creativity or whatever we can do to for the future of CORE, and how we can manage that. So I'd like to see that added to our list of many things I think will be on our list for our board retreat as we move forward into 2020.
Were you referring to financing CORE, but as
Yeah.
REMP goes away?
Yeah, and we've talked about that. Remember when I was talking about when I was chair of CORE many years ago, that was going to happen. And when we first started it, we were like, oh, we might make a couple $100,000, and then the millions were coming in, and we were like, oh my gosh. And every year it was, is it going to dry up? Is it going to dry up? And we may be at that. We don't know, but I think it's closer now and more reality it might be, and I think we should plan.
Yeah, and I think you'll see a lot of what might be when we go over the new energy code proposals on the 20th. I forget where we are, on the 20th.
Yeah, but I just want to throw that out there because I know we're looking at the board's retreat for 2020, and John's making a list and checking it twice, and I think we should add this. I don't know where the chair next year may want the board retreat to go, but I think this is discussion when we're prioritizing our schedule, our tasks for 2020. I think this should be included in there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, everything we do through a lens of climate action planning, and certainly CORE is our organization that really helps address that, not only for the county but for the large community as a whole. So
yeah, I think in adding to that, why I wanted it to make sure that it's in our list is because we have a lot of issues that are rising to the top of funding. Childcare, public safety, and how are we going to be able to manage all of that in a very short period of time? And I think that it all needs to be part of the discussion.
Steve?
Thank you. I agree.
I have a question about the 50-50 city-county split for funding the things. And I think I must have maybe I don't totally understand the REMP funding. So the county has a REMP fund that has $2.1 million in it. Does the city also have a REMP fund? And does the money for those REMP funds come from the mitigation for things that are done within the city or within the county? Is that how the money ends up in those two funds?
Yes, they used to be joint. The funds, the county would generate our funds through the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, which says that we charge for any excess outside heating of pools, snowmelt
understand
driveway, and all of
those.
that. And that would go into one bucket fund, if you will, for years and years and years with the city. Was it last year we split that out to be the city and the county? And so now that's why you see it separated. It's always been a 50-50 match, but the funds are now separated, so you see that smaller bucket with the city and the smaller bucket with the county.
So how does the city fund their side of the bucket?
Same way we
As
do
a
with
rep-
REMP.
Through the REMP?
They have a
For
little bit,
projects that are built within city limits?
correct.
Right,
Okay,
yes,
that's what I did, that's the part I didn't understand.
right. Those excess energy consumptive devices, hot
Okay.
tubs, pools, snow melt, for commercial and residential, just like the county.
Exterior use
Yes.
of energy.
Any other questions, Kelly? Did you have a question?
I guess I would just ask Mona, because you guys just went through a strategic planning process, and I'm not going to remember the exact goal, but can you restate kind of the mission statement about Roaring Fork Valley being a net zero?
Sure, that's it. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to lead the Roaring Fork Valley to a carbon-free net zero energy future. And so you will see a change in our programs this year to be much more intentional, to focus on net zero projects being and carbon-free. And we could go into the subtle differences between the two at some point if you'd like, but.
Great, thank you. Despite being timely, still bold in this day.
Yes,
So.
it is. And we have 4 strategic priorities, just to remind you. One is carbon reduction, because we know that's what we're trying to achieve. Project design optimization, and that's the idea of looking at projects as they come in before they get built, so we can help them be more energy efficient, or as energy efficient as possible, or net zero, ideally, and then creating a carbon-free culture. And that's so we can, as George just mentioned, look at our lifestyle through that lens of how is it carbon-free. And then organizational resilience, and that speaks to what Patty just mentioned. How can CORE continue to deliver on the projects and the programs that we've developed over the last 25 years?
Thank you.
And I did watch you do that presentation last night. You were on Grassroots again. I was looking for election results and watched Mona.
How fun.
I wanted to know how is outreach going with to the architectural community, for instance. The one opportunity I had to talk about net zero with a group of local architects, the impression I got is there was a lot of excitement about it. Actually, it was a challenge, and some people were trepidatious, others were taking it as a challenge and enthusiastic about it. And I know buy-in from our design community will be important, our planning community. So I'm encouraging, certainly go for it if there's an opportunity to reach out and engage, more the better. The other thing I wanted to say was that at the CORE 25th, congratulations to CORE, by the way. At the CORE 25th, George gave a short outline of his vision for CORE 2040 or 2050, and it was actually really great. And I want to make sure we all have a chance to see that if you publish it or share it with us at some point, because it was a fairly clear-eyed vision with some aspirational ideas on what we could actually do with CORE in the community. And so I wanted to thank and recognize you for that, because I'm still thinking about it.
Good.
And celebrating the 25th of CORE. We've come a long way, actually.
I think so. And just to go back to your point about the architectural communities, I think one of the best ways that we've had is through the working group that Cindy put together, because it really brought
That's
together
great.
so many different sectors of the development community. And one, I think it gave people it opened their eyes about what the funds do that are generated by REMP. A lot of times they did not know what was happening with them, and maybe, for whatever reason, they haven't heard about the good work the Corps does, but I think that really opened up their eyes, and so they could feel better about paying REMP. They also started understanding more about, well, what does net zero look like? And also what they can be doing on their, with their clients, as whether they're an architect or a developer or a realtor. And so I think those are the primary sectors that have been involved. And so that was a really that's been an incredible educational opportunity and connection opportunity for Corps, because we've been now working with a lot more of the builders like Hanson Construction, and Sam Barney is now focusing on turning his own home into a net zero
It's so
home.
fun to watch. He's 2 doors down from me.
Yeah,
He's doing
so
a great job.
there's some really tangible results from that project, that working group that we've had, and then just I think a lot of the conversation around carbon and carbon emissions and what people can do has really raised and increased just the inquiry that we're getting on a daily basis from architects and builders and homeowners too. We had somebody who come in the office just yesterday morning to talk about what we can do to help. So,
Right.
yeah.
I know homeowners can be involved in this, as you just mentioned, and it doesn't matter what size home we're talking about. It's not just the big homes we're worried about. It's all of them, all of our homes.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
anybody, home of any size can actually do something.
And the existing homes are sort of the biggest challenge, if you will, because we can work on these building codes and we can ratchet down, and as Cindy said, on the 20th, you're going to get the full picture of what that can look like. It's the existing homes that we really need to scale and move along a little faster.
Right. Last question I had is just about the region Corps. How big is Corps' influence for the public? And, is there a talk about expanding? We talk about valley-wide partnerships, reaching all the way to, the far end of Holy Cross's, utility footprint, for instance. And I'm just wondering if that's something we could talk about at the retreat.
I'm sure that the Corps typically has offered our services Aspen to Glenwood Springs. That's when the RENT program was set up back in 1999 and 2000, and Cindy was part of those memos when we dug them out last year. That's where the conversation was about where Corps would serve, and we still do. So we work with those. We haven't actually talked about expanding Corps' reach beyond that. I think we talk about just in trying to be really good and proficient at the work that we do, because we don't want to stretch ourselves too thin. So if we had that conversation, I think we'd have to figure out, well, what does that really look like? As you know, there's other organizations like CLEAR who serve Garfield County, and how do we, coordinate, I think, is probably some of the questions. And how do what we're focused on right now is some Upper Valley. We just had a meeting yesterday with the Upper Valley sort of Climate Action Collaborative. How do we get our communities working together better, utilizing our resources more efficiently, not just the energy resources, but the people resources or the financial resources. So I think that's a piece that we could really strengthen.
And I'll give you just a quick little bit of history from, I think it was maybe 2008, 9, 10, when CLEAR was being created. CLEAR wanted to become the regional organization because CLEAR was uncertain of their funding and they wanted to utilize REMP funds. So it was a very, very difficult time in this action, this activity, and this movement for clean energy use. And then it was decided that REMP would stay, the Corps would stay Corps, and that CLEAR would create its own. And then Glenwood Springs, I think, created its own on top of that. So there's CLEAR, and then there are Glenwood Springs Energy.
No, there's a whole Garfield Clean Energy group that
Right.
encompasses all of Garfield, and Glenwood Springs is part of that. And
Right, and then there's CLEAR, the CLEAR organization itself. And it was a very difficult time. There was a lot of debate and discussion it was not easy, because we all had the same goal in mind. It was just, we were being very protective of the monies generated in Pickens County for use in Pickens County, with some exceptions where we were spreading the wealth just a little bit because it made sense. So that was a long discussion. So I did notice the word regionalism a lot in this memo, which we do. You can't, because, climate change doesn't stop at county lines, just like forest fires. So that there's a reason to look collaboratively regionally, so.
Thanks for that
And
history.
as we explore new ideas for revenues, who knows? I mean, I think George
Who knows?
mentioned the Healthy Climate Fund at one point. It's like, wow, that could be regional. So.
Right. Great.
Sometimes we get our work cut out for us with
Looking
that
forward
regional
to the
groups now got it.
conversation. Meanwhile, back to the issue at hand. Thank you for the conversation on that.
Well, thank you. It's good.
Are we ready for a motion?
It's a public hearing.
Oh, it's a public hearing. Thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment regarding CORE? Doesn't seem like it. I'm going to close it back and bring it back to us.
I'd make a motion to approve.
I've got a motion
I will second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right. Moving right along here. Land use items. Land use public hearings, resolution approving JCH LLC subdivision conceptual submission. Tammy's here.
Yeah. So,
Mitch is here.
Joe's here.
Joe's here.
Did you find that receipt?
Welcome.
So, this is the application for the JCH LLC. Like you said, some subdivision conceptual submission approval to subdivide the 21.4 acre lot into 2 lots, and activity envelope review for the new lot. The BOCC approved the application on first reading on October 23rd, subject to some very minor revisions in the resolution, which were completed and are in your packet. Since that time, a letter was submitted from Joe Wells, and I believe you guys all were emailed a copy. I also have copies if you didn't get that. And in response to that, we received a letter from Gary Wright with Wright Law of Aspen yesterday.
I didn't yet. I haven't seen
Yeah,
it.
so that wasn't emailed to you. So I can
You wanna hand
actually
those
have
out? That'd be
Susan
great.
maybe can pass those out. So that was in response to Joe's letter. And to summarize, I guess Joe's here too, so he may want to speak, but to summarize his concerns, he had mainly 2 concerns, one with stored equipment outside, and also the use of some, I guess, access paths to the avalanche mitigation structure, and then another path down to the near the creek for some maintenance down there. And so staff doesn't have much of an opinion on the condition regarding the stored equipment. However, those roads, my understanding is they're basically a 2-track, kind of an access way to those 2 areas. Those were never reviewed in a site plan or activity envelope review. And so we're not formally recognizing that they're improved anyway. They may just be, an area where that they use for access. And so, by not including them in an activity envelope, no improvements may occur anyways. So I think that would cover Joe's concerns. Mitch may have some opinions about that as well, but that's staff's position on that concern. And just recently, just this morning, Mitch also submitted a few revisions he'd like to see in the resolution, 2 conditions. The first being in the recital number 6 in the resolution, he has asked for an addition to the last sentence to state that basically Lot 16 was developed. Lot 16 and 15 are unique in that both lots existed prior to the creation of CCVR, but were included in the CCVR subdivision and are depicted on the CCVR plat. Mitch would like to add, but lots 15 and 16 are specifically excluded from and not subject to the CCVR covenants. Staff does not support this addition. We believe that the relationship between the lot and the subdivision is between those two entities, and the county doesn't need to define what that relationship is at this time. The second amendment Mitch would like to make is on condition number 12. He'd like a sentence to be added at the end of that paragraph to state, if the CWCB does not accept the water right dedication, then Pickens County and/or county beneficiary shall accept the water rights dedication. I think this kind of is already stated, but we were happy to add that with the minor tweak, instead of saying shall, to say may accept the water rights instead of shall. So with that, staff still recommends that the board approve the item, and I guess I'll.
With the additions.
With the, well, right, I'll let you guys discuss it, and maybe Mitch wants to make a couple points on that.
We want to
but
go to questions then with
yeah.
Kelly?
Does the attorney have any objection to that language of the
That's
water
basically
right?
what we discussed last meeting.
Yeah.
Wasn't included in the draft resolution, but I think it fairly encompasses what was discussed.
As far as the water language. What about the position on the added language about the covenants and, I mean, it's kind of like we try and stay out of HOA issues because it's really not our jurisdiction. And I think we're just trying to stay clean on that in this too by saying it's between those entities and the county is not party to that.
Okay. That's always the more solid ground to be on.
Okay. We understand their concerns, it's just that we don't need to be party to that. We don't.
Steve?
So Tammy, could you go over the aspects of what the county requirements are for the visual appearance of the property from the road?
Sure.
Just for, so we
find that
can have a
condition.
full understanding of that.
I think it's number, I want to say 8.
8.
I think that's right.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, condition number 8. So that speaks to the scenic view protection area, and those are really standard conditions in our code. So basically, they need to use indigenous earth tone colors on the exterior materials. Roofs shall be non-reflective. It basically refers to that section that has lighting restrictions as well. And then I guess I'll also mention that as part of their commitments, there was some commitments made to put a lot of the floor area below ground and reduce the height. So there's that as well, which is in one of these conditions as well.
Before that somewhere.
Yeah, condition number 7 has those aspects.
And in terms of just the general county regulation of things stored outside, like an Airstream trailer that would be reflective, seems like a good solution would be just a fence, a wooden fence that could shield that from the road. But there's not a requirement on the county's part
Right.
to require someone to do that.
Right.
Okay.
It'd be nice and neighborly, but it's not something we can require.
Okay.
Questions? I'm going to open up the public hearing.
Or does,
Is there-
Mitch have
Unless
something?
there's more you have in your presentation, we can,
Does Mitch?
Mitch gets to present.
oh, I suppose if you want. Sure. We've seen you on this before. But
I
sure,
think
go
I could
ahead.
be brief. Good afternoon, I'm Mitch Haas, representing JCH LLC. Yeah, our first reading was only 2 weeks ago. Hopefully no one's completely forgotten about it yet. Not really any issues that we had to specifically address other than just some clarifying language. So yeah, we asked to add a little bit to recital number 6, but that was not something critical to us. It was one of those might as well ask, can't hurt. So if and I understand the county not wanting to include that language, so it's not something we're here to really fight over or push too hard for. With regard to the language we asked to add to condition 12, it's really just an attempt to clarify, because as we've probably all seen, I know I certainly have, you move a year, 2, 3 down the line, nobody remembers exactly what was discussed, and then you're getting, we didn't want to find ourselves caught in a catch-22, if you will, of my understanding when we were here 2 weeks ago was if the Colorado Water Conservation Board, for whatever reason, can't accept the donation, the intention was then the county or your beneficiary would. I was just trying to put that in here and clarify that that's the case, so that if we get 2, 3 years down the line, people aren't scratching their heads going, well, you can't meet the condition of approval because they said no. And now maybe the county's said, well, maybe we don't want it now. And then we're stuck on, well, we can't meet a condition of approval if everyone says no. So we were just trying to clarify that. You know, we know that the county or the county beneficiary may accept the water rights dedication. We were trying to be clear that if all of our efforts with the Water Conservation Board should fail for whatever reason, we know the county or beneficiary will accept it. So it doesn't do us any good to say may accept it, because I think that was correct. It's already said there. We were trying to say shall, so that we don't run into a problem down the line. So that was really the only change that we were looking to make in the language of the resolution. I was gonna wait on the scenic review stuff, but it's come up already, so I might as well try to address it. Our thinking here is, one, we know there's a condition in here, and we're quite clear going in to begin with that these lots remain subject to scenic review, particularly the newly created lot that we know we're planning to do some development on. I don't think it's appropriate to prejudge a scenic review application when we haven't even applied for it yet. So the standard language that Tammy put in here, it's standard language. In fact, it's language that just reiterates what's already written in the code, so that's totally fine by us. This new or suggested language that Joe has come up with about outdoor equipment, I want to be agreeable and I want to say, sure, no problem, but I'm worried it'll become a problem. And on both sides of our table here, for the applicants and for the county. One, I don't believe the county has ever regulated that sort of thing on any property before. So I feel like it's weird to start setting that precedent on individual properties, particularly when we haven't even applied for scenic review yet. Secondly, I don't think the county wants to get into the position of having to monitor how many days something's been sitting on a property for, and then having to enforce these things when it's really a private matter. And as we know, this property is not subject to the Castle Creek Valley Ranch covenants. So why take one particular aspect of those covenants and say, now it's applicable to this property, but it's not on the HOA to deal with, it's the county's problem. I feel like it's an inappropriate thing to do. And then there's all kinds of problems I'm having just with the particular language about if I store something that's not earth-toned. Now, you know, as we know with the county all the time, people are arguing over what's an earth tone. You know, if you're in an aspen forest, is white earth tone? If it's winter, is white earth tone? If you're up in an area where all the rock around you is red, is that an earth tone? You know, so I just see it as becoming a big mess and something frankly unnecessary. You know, other parts of the language about typically what we do, or the county code, particularly with scenic review, is as discernible with the naked eye from Castle Creek Road. None of that kind of language was included in the proposed condition either. So what is it, just if anyone can see it from anywhere, now it's a problem that the county has to enforce? I just think it's impractical and really not what we would call a legitimate governmental concern. And if it were a legitimate governmental concern, it probably would have been applied somewhere on other properties in the history of Pickens County before this one. So that's where we stand on that one. With regard to the roads, I'd agree with Tammy's take that we have a condition addressing it. We have not put activity envelopes around those old 2-track roads that we have said are just for service use, and they're kind of grown over anyway. So I just thought it was unnecessary to include another whole paragraph about that. I feel like it's covered. I think that covers what we wanted to say in the presentation. I don't know if more will come up now, but we'll see.
Questions? Kelly?
Question. Tammy, when does something trend from being in a service use to being in an activity envelope area of use?
Good question. I mean, really, so how we define development, it comes down to how we define development, and, you know, whether the grass gets beaten down because someone walks there every day. I don't think that's development. Does get a little bit gray, I'm sure. But you know, as soon as they start grading or changing the grade, you know, moving, I think we have a threshold of 200 square feet, and you know, grading certain at 50 cubic yards of dirt. Once that gets moved, that's considered development. So those, we have certain thresholds like that, but
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Seeing no more questions here, I am going to open up the public hearing. We have some people who probably want to comment. Please come up and get on a microphone. He's got one over here. Move it.
Then you can just take Jeanette's.
Joe Wells. I'm comfortable deferring this decision about what's appropriate around in the way of storage until scenic review. I did want to mention, however, that I'm not suggesting that the CCVR covenant be applied to this property. The CCVR covenant is extremely restrictive. For instance, with regard to trailers, for those lots that the covenants apply, trailers must be either stored in a garage or completely invisible from an adjacent property. So my language is not even close to that restrictive, so, but I'm happy deferring this issue till scenic review. The other issues have been addressed. Tammy added language to condition 8 that addressed several of the concerns I'd raised previously. And I spoke to her recently about this condition 9 language that I was proposing, and it was clear that staff would like to maintain the language as it's worded, so I'm okay with that.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Other public comment? Gary, anybody else? No one else has anything else for us? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Steve?
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution approving the JCH LLC subdivision conceptual submission activity envelope review.
I'll second.
And we have a second, and this is for, are we looking at November 20th?
No, this was
This
the
is second
This
reading.
was second reading, God, sorry.
This is the final deal, right?
This
there.
was it. This was it. Okay, we've got a motion, we've got a second, and all in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
thank you.
All right, thanks for coming in.
Did you forget something?
We just weren't sure whether or not we added anything to condition 12.
Oh, with the amendment to condition 12, with the change of the language shall to may, or,
Mitch's addition concerning CWCB.
I didn't see
and,
any objection to adding that, so.
And you wanted to say
To do it technically, should we reconsider?
We have to reconsider it with those additions, changes.
I'll move to
we have a motion.
reconsider.
A second?
We have a motion and a second, all in
Thanks, I'm.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So I'll reframe the motion to approve the resolution with the amendments that have been noted.
And can I get John to weigh in the language of may or shall, just to clarify that?
Okay, further
John?
discussion?
Well, we didn't have discussion on that actually, so.
Sorry to complicate.
Discussion on a number is May.
That's what we suggested, and Mitch mentioned that.
Asking if we could have it be shall. Again, like, it's not something we're gonna run out of.
Taking the county to an action like that where we don't presently have the ability to act on it is something I wouldn't recommend. So we may accept the water right for stream management or stream enhancement purposes, but we presently today don't have that ability. It would be something we would have to construct. Sorry.
So we're gonna leave it at shall.
We're gonna leave it at
May.
May.
Yeah, as may. I think we can live with that. Is there a way to say, you know, it's the county's intention to, should?
You're good.
Or, we're good? Okay, we're good.
So we don't need to amend the language?
May.
May.
Oh, so it's,
Keeping it at May, and we've passed that.
Okay.
I already moved my packet.
Steve has included that within his motion, which covers the rest of the language of the resolution.
Okay, and we have a second to be certain of that.
Yep,
And I
with the
called it.
word may.
Is this the one I already called? All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
You try it again?
Clear as.
Okay, thank you. Sorry
Thank
for
you.
the confusion.
All right,
There's earth
thank you.
tones.
Thanks, Tim, thanks, Mitch. Earth tones, yeah, earth tones. It's kind of
I'm gonna go grab some water.
yeah.
Want to take 5 or 10?
We're gonna take a 10-minute break. If that's okay. We'll be back at 1:50. Thanks, Grassroots. 10-minute break.
Ask you to go.
Back with our Wednesday, November 6th regular commissioners meeting, and we are in land use public hearings. And up next is the resolution approving Highland Bavarian subdivision detailed submission and final plat. This is the second reading, and Leslie's here, and Glenn is here, and Sarah's here. Lenny's here.
Everyone's here.
Rye's here. Paul's here. Okay, take it away.
Okay, well, for the record, I'm Leslie Lamont, Senior Planner, ComDev. And the applicant, Highland Ranch LTD, is represented by Glenn Horn, Lenny Oates, and Sarah Oates. As you said, this is subdivision detailed submission, review, and final plat review. So just as a brief recap, the project creates two parcels. The ranch parcel, which is right here, and the Mesa parcel. Transfers of development square footage off of the Castle Creek parcel have been transferred onto the ranch parcel and the Mesa parcel. And to clarify, a development right for 5,750 square feet for a single-family residence was transferred to the Mesa parcel. And a density bonus for one additional residence on the ranch parcel to equal 5,750 square feet plus 4,000 square foot basement and a 750 square foot garage. The project historically conserves the Highland Bavarian Lodge and the accessory structures to the lodge and the ski runs. The project places a conservation easement on the Castle Creek parcel and on the ranch parcel. It establishes two public trails along Conundrum Creek Road, right through here, and then on the Castle Creek parcel. There's also proposed an overlook on the Castle Creek parcel, and it establishes an activity envelope for the ranch parcel and establishes an activity envelope for the Mesa parcel and site plan review for the Mesa parcel. So the BOCC approved conceptual review in February 2019. The P&Z reviewed the detailed submission application in September of this year, September 3rd, and the P&Z unanimously recommends approval to the BOCC. The BOCC conducted a site visit on October 15th to observe the story poles that had been set up on the ranch parcel. The BOCC held a duly noticed public hearing on October 23rd, which was first reading of the resolution. At that meeting, you all discussed whether to grant an extended vested rights period. At conceptual, the BOCC approved a 6-year vested rights period. The P&Z at final recommended 10 years vested rights, and the applicant requests 10-year vested rights. And I just want to point out that in my memo, I mentioned 6-year vested rights, but in the resolution, it still says 10-year vested rights with the vesting period to run to 2029. The BOCC asked who would maintain the trails and the interpretive sign, and that would be the open space trail staff. The cost of constructing the trails is roughly estimated to be $14,520 for the Castle Creek Trail
and $5,892 for the Conundrum Creek Trail. And that includes, for both of those trails, a 10% mobilization fee. The applicant and the open space staff have discussed language for the conservation easement on the ranch parcel. And they've been working on language that provides flexibility while preserving the scenic quality aspects of the ranch parcel. If you recall our discussion during first reading, and I have,
Right, I've got it up here.
let's see. Okay, Glenn, you're gonna have to do that.
Which page are you?
With the, we have a really good graphic, but it's not in here, of the ranch parcel where the conservation easement and the activity envelope, and there's a gap between the two.
Right, yeah, let's see it. That'd be
yeah,
great to see.
Yeah. You pull it up. I think we had this problem last time and Glenn had to pull it up and provide it.
Okay, so we go like this.
There you go.
That's not the one.
No, go over to here.
You gotta go, hit that, yeah, hit the
Go in
down
here.
arrow.
This one?
Yeah.
They're up in the trees, literally.
Isn't there one that where he goes like just the size? There
That's
we
it.
go. Okay, hold on.
That's,
No.
Oh,
you're
wow.
scrolling,
Did I miss it?
go,
Okay, go one more. Now go to here.
Now enlarge.
Now enlarge.
Yay.
Okay, but we have one where we show, where we propose the easement to be. Anyway, this'll work for your discussion.
Turn your mic on there, Glenn, or
Maybe just
point it at me.
swing it.
All right,
Yeah, there you go.
This one's fine. Okay, yeah, this is fine for this. We have one where we have the easement drawn on there too, but that's fine.
So purple's your activity envelope?
Yes. Why don't you, we should find it.
Okay, hold on. I'll just go down to it.
While you're looking for that, I realize you've compiled so many great historical archival materials. Probably some come from the Historical Society, but will all this be made available so they'll have this? Because your presentation has a lot of great
The history
stuff
was
in it
great.
that ought to be somewhere so we can
Right.
access it.
right.
Well,
So-
we have to do the designation report as part of the,
Okay.
before you file the historic covenant. So we'll record that, and it's in the files too, but we can record it and give it to the Historical Society too.
So while you're looking for that, let me just wrap up. As part of the discussion at first reading, like with what the costs of the trails were, and then with the discussions between the applicant and the Open Space and Trails Board with regard to the conservation easement boundary and the activity envelope boundary, I've drafted some revised language for your reso that I do have on my thumb drive that we can go back to and talk about after the applicant's presentation.
Great. Okay.
That's the graphic you're looking for, I think.
Yes. Right, so this is just to remind you guys. So here, this is the ranch parcel, and here's the conservation easement to here, and this is the gap that we talked about during first reading, and here is the activity envelope here. And the Open Space and Trails staff have recommended, they originally recommended that the conservation easement come down and match the activity envelope. And if you recall, Glenn talked about having some flexibility during site plan approval. So with this review process, you are approving the activity envelope only on the ranch parcel. And site plan would come back, which is an administrative review, as someone is proposing to redevelop the site. And Glenn wanted more flexibility in this area. Scenic quality issues are definitely a concern, and scenic quality is one of the items that we consider during site plan review. But I think open space and trails is concerned because of the scenic quality issues. We often see people during site plan review seeking to amend their activity envelope. So we have some language that's been recommended by open space and trails staff and another map to go with that to kind of help you guys to a decision.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So,
Question from
a
Steve.
real quick question with regards to the gap. The part that's outside the activity envelope that's not in your proposed conservation easement area includes all the land that wraps around to the other end. And I presume that that wasn't the intention to include all of that in the conservation easement, but only up, just dropping the yellow line down to meet the horizontal blue line. Is that your understanding of it, Glenn? Or was it to include the whole area that's not in the activity envelope?
So open space and trails would like for all that area outside the activity envelope to be included in the conservation easement.
Including that down below?
Right, right.
Okay.
And there are two things. There's one thing going on for sure, and as part of the approval, the applicant has to realign the where the driveway accesses Castle Creek Road, and then that's going to drive, well, and our Pickens County standards are driving additional improvements to that driveway. So that's a little bit of a concern that you don't want to have a conservation easement pinching where the road has to go. But I also want to say that Paul Holsinger from Open Space and Trails is here and can answer any questions on their behalf.
Can I just, John Peacock, can you close that back slide? Because I think she's getting glare off the TV camera monitors. Sorry, I just noticed her trying to figure out how to get the blind down. Yeah, sorry. There.
Okay, where are we, Glenn?
Thank
Do you
you.
want to?
Well, I can start at the beginning, but I think I might just start right on this point
Yeah,
because
great.
it's fresh in your mind. With respect to this conservation easement, we originally proposed it to be on the north end of the meadows, to begin right here. As I said at the other meeting a couple weeks ago, we haven't site planned this activity envelope yet. I kind of think the barn may be right in this area. I don't know. But, you know, if someone does a barn, and what Leslie says is true, wherever you put the barn is going to be subject to a scenic review from Castle Creek Road. So that's going to be one part of the site plan review. So I don't see that there would be a problem now moving this line down to right about where it says ranch parcel, right in this area. You know, we could do that. And we've discussed the concept with the owners about after everything's been site planned, just extend the conservation easement to areas, so that it butts right up with the activity envelope. And that calls into question what's going to happen down here, which Steve is talking about. This area where the trees are can certainly be conserved as long as we can make the driveway improvements. You know, I don't see that that would be a problem. And I talked with Paul this morning, and Sarah worked with him yesterday about exceptions in the conservation easement for certain activities, such as improvements to an existing drive, as were required in our land use approval. So we could accommodate that and conserve this area where the trees are here, because I don't think anyone wants to see the trees ever disturbed other than for driveway construction. When you get down in here, you see there's a pond there. That pond's been there for a long time. I think it's possible that a new owner, when they site plan it, may change the shape of the pond or expand the pond. They have the water rights to do that. So we would like to keep this area in here outside of the conservation easement until the property site planned. And then, you know, that could be adjusted, and we've talked about making building in that flexibility. So anyway, that's where we are on this graphic.
Can I just ask a question? Couldn't language be written into a conservation easement that also allowed for some kind of alterations, expansion of the pond? So I think the language, we've gotten pretty good at doing that with conservation easements, rather than having to go back and keep amending them, just giving some flexibility within the conservation language itself. So that might be something you can discuss as it moves forward too. If you're gonna do it for the trees, let's do it for the pond.
Kelly, question?
I have a question with regards to the northern portion. If the language is to allow flexibility here after the site planning process, is there, what happens if, based on scenic review or owner's preference, that they want to put the barn further in the meadow or on the other side of the meadow or something like that?
Well, the conservation easement, and Sarah can speak to the specific language she worked out with Paul, it'll provide for, let's say, maybe a loafing shed or something out in the conservation easement. But as far as, a barn, like a large barn, as permitted under zoning, it could not go in the conservation easement.
Correct, yeah. We talked about light agricultural uses like a corral or a loafing barn, but, pretty, not intensive use, but nothing like a, large barn.
So, if there are no further questions about this issue, we can just address some of the other ones, but I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
I just wanted to say I appreciated what Patty said about, I can imagine that pond needing to be mucked out, or, something needs to be changed if there's a bank stabilization issue, or, it's just, if there's an opportunity to put flexibility in anticipating something like that, that makes sense, but maybe that's not where we need to go at this point.
Well, I'm just thinking it might be easier if we're doing a conservation easement to do it as close to where we want it to be than to keep coming back and amending it and changing it as things move forward. Not to say that we might not have to do that in the future, but there's things that are coming to the surface now that we might be able to attend to.
Our thought with respect to amending the conservation easement was that once site plan is completed, we just re-record it with a revised exhibit and legal description.
Wrapping it up.
Wrapping it up. So, and again, I think that allows whoever develops the property flexibility to say, hey, maybe let's put the pond in the activity envelope, but tighten it up somewhere else. So, I just think that's the cleanest way, so.
Okay. Thank you.
And bear in mind, going through scenic review on this property is a significant review, and I can't imagine that it will be easy to propose something in these open meadows that will be in a form that's approvable by the county. Anyway, so with respect to some of these other things and the 10-year vested property right, we went back to Mac and Bruce Coffey and discussed, what they would be willing to do with regard to trail development and the plaque to earn the right to have the 10-year vested property right. And we gave them the estimates that were provided by Open Space and Trails, and the Coffeys have agreed to pay for the cost of the trails as estimated by Open Space and Trails, provided the entitlements that were enumerated in the conceptual land use approval are part of the detailed and final plat approval, and if they can get the 10-year vested property right. They've also said that it'll be acceptable for the trail crew to camp on the property when the trails are getting built, because there would be some cost savings involved with that. So these cost estimates of $14,520 for the Castle Creek Trail and $5,892 for the Conundrum Trail are acceptable, as is the estimate to build the plaque, which came in at about $1,400. We provided that estimate to Open Space and Trails and to Leslie, and that's for fabrication of the plaque and installation. So that would be acceptable to the Coffey family if their requests are part of the detailed submission and final plat. And There's some cleanup language that Sarah went over on the conservation easement with Paul, and I think we've worked that out. And I think we're pretty much in agreement with the Community Development Department over the language in the approval resolution. Leslie has some additional language that she wants to share. You gotta go. Okay, there you go.
I have to do this again.
That's it in
We love
winter.
Leslie's
in a
slides.
blizzard.
Don't you love my slides? Okay, here we go.
Here it is.
Yay. This is a goal of mine.
You did it, good girl, you did
Well
it.
done. Gold star.
It is.
I'm impressed, I am so impressed.
Okay, so this is the language that I've drafted, obviously, of course, it can be tweaked, but that I would add to the reso. This is in relation to the cost of the trails. And this is in relationship to the conservation easement with, going with the theme of after site plan.
Right.
While they work on the easement language. And then here is.
Wait, can I go back to that? What does it mean the trail crew can camp on the property, on the ranch?
Jesse Young asked if the trail crew could camp on the property when they're building the trails, because she said it would reduce their costs a little bit.
Not in perpetuity.
Can I be on that trail crew?
Yeah, it would be while the trail's being constructed.
Steve?
I would suggest we add the words during construction of the trail.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want to have it
That's
like
right.
in the future, they come to maintain the trail and they set up camp there,
And we should
which is not the intent of
We
it.
should also add the open space and trail crew, just for clarification.
Commissioner picnics.
Might be what?
It might be shop.
Well, but still, they'd be,
Or whomever.
Right.
George had a question?
Yeah, what are they doing for water, for toilets, for while they're camping there?
The copies did offer up one of the, so there's currently some little cabins with kitchens and baths in them, and they did offer those up if available.
Active.
Yeah,
Available,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
They said if they're available and no one's using them, they could, clean up and shower and.
well, they stop to have something used during the day while they're working, so porta potty or.
Yeah, okay.
Paul Holsinger, Pickett County Open Space and Trails.
I was
So-
expecting me driving up and down the road.
So,
Video,
yeah,
that's
this
fun.
usually isn't my forte, but the reason this is in here is because I think we had a trail crew do some work on 7-Star, and we have a no camping on open space policy.
Oh,
And the crew we shopped it out. They're a contractor. They came out with campers. They have like a pop-up camper and a little pull-behind trailer that's got a toilet and everything, and they would just camp on site, knock it out. But since we had the no camping, they had to
find a place to
charge
camp.
us for an Aspen or Snowmass hotel, which was
Okay,
more than a trailer.
Is there camper earth tone?
I don't know.
Okay, we're not gonna ask that one.
Is it a
Scratch
tiny
that
home or
question.
RV?
Okay, that's, anything else on this? Keep
Okay,
going.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
clarification.
Okay,
So do we have to, do we have to have in this reso the condition in terms of client paying for the design and construction of the plaque?
that is already in your reso.
Already in here? Okay, great, thanks.
Yes, so, that is number 3 of the conditions of approval in the reso.
Huh. Yeah. No?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I don't see it in mine, but,
It's right,
127, page 127.
right there.
okay, that's fine.
Ready?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so number 2 is just outlining that we need to nail down this language with the ranch parcel conservation easement and looking for the BOCC either direction that you like where it's going, or you want to add, like Patty, you wanted to add pond language. Let me show you.
But it's okay.
This is the language that Paul and Sarah have talked about so far, adding into the conservation easement.
Right.
This would not go in the reso, it would just go in the conservation easement.
I was just looking at a way to simplify, but Sarah said that when we get everything done at the end of the day, we can do one final without the bright language in there. So I'm comfortable with that.
Do you think, I'm asking Rye, because he's gonna work with Open Space and Trails on the language. Is this enough direction for you?
Oh, yeah, it's plenty of direction.
Okay. Okay, and then number 3 is looking at, so after site plan review for the ranch parcel, then we would marry the activity envelope and the conservation easement boundaries, and those would be documented on the site plan. And if necessary, if we need to amend the conservation easement,
Right.
then that would also have to be recorded at the same time.
Right.
Am I getting that?
Yeah.
Am
we
I
would
getting
just-
all these pieces and parts in the flow correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, questions? John?
Is the cost for the trail, is that understood to be a not to exceed amount? Or is it applicants paying for the cost of the trail, period?
Our impression was that it would be, they would pay this cost estimate, but not in excess of that.
So they're agreeing to the 14,530?
Do we need to make it more
I like
clear?
the estimate of 5,892.
So, Paul, when you guys did the estimate, are you based on 2019, 2020, or 2025 prices, or how do you do that?
I wasn't a part of that conversation, but I'm sure that it was based on today's costs.
So today's cost, but if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, we should have some sort of,
Escalator?
yeah.
I don't know if we need
Or
to go.
time commitment.
Lock the contractor
No,
in now.
not time commitment, but, well, time commitment would be, you could do that prior to, I don't know, construction of the, I don't know. But it seems like if it, I don't know, is it, are we looking at doing this in 2020, under schedule?
I don't know. Right now, just the entire staff is backed up pretty good on projects. So I think this all depends on if this closes and we can get on a schedule of a contractor. So.
Yeah, I mean, we just know, we saw some pretty large overruns for the Castle Creek Trail just because you couldn't get contractors willing to do it. They were so busy. So I'd be a little concerned about limiting just to it's an estimate, and you could say not to exceed by, or to, we need some flexibility, I think. And not to, not to nickel and dime the applicants, but there's a reality here that if it goes another $5,000,
Well, if you want to put a not to exceed, $25,000. Yeah, I mean, that would be acceptable.
What, John Peacock, we estimate a 10%, sometimes a 10%
Or more.
inflation for construction.
Yeah, construction inflation's been near double digits or at double digits, around 10%.
Would it make sense to put it into, 1990 or 2019 dollars for this, and understanding that there's an inflation rate depending on when it gets done?
I think their staff knows what kind of language to put in there. For
I think we
Whatever
could
you're
just do
familiar
not to exceed, and even if it's, so right now you're around 20K and using the 10%, if you could just say not to exceed 25,000, that should, I would think that would cover
Okay,
it.
yeah, if you're satisfied and then they get it done before.
Wasn't the intent just to determine what we were talking about as far as trail expense, so that the applicant wasn't walking into something that was unknown and all of a sudden it's $100,000.
Right, that's right, so-
So you have an idea now what it's gonna cost if the project lags, or if they run into a big rock, or if they don't get started on it for 5 years, it's going to exceed that amount. But it's going to be based on something that is, you know, within the realm of expectation. Without knowing when it's gonna get built, I don't know how you come up with a not to exceed amount. You're just kind of throwing a dart.
Well, the only problem I have is that I don't know how much the applicant's representatives can speak now, and do we want to take it back again and bring it back again if we're going to say not to exceed 25,000, which I think you're comfortable with moving forward with.
We're comfortable with that. I mean, obviously, the concern is that 5 years from now, it turns into 35,000
Yeah.
or 50,000, and it isn't our schedule
Right.
to get it built.
But I don't think
So-
you can give us an approval right now from your applicant, from your.
Can we not add an escalator to, I was gonna say, today's dollars say this, and with an escalator, not to exceed whatever the, just so they can
10%.
anticipate it's gonna cost more, the longer out it gets delayed. That might give an incentive to get it done sooner, but not sure you have control over that.
Right,
I'm just trying to think
right.
of how do we do it so it's realistic for everyone.
Right.
Let's figure that out now if we can.
Yeah, I mean, we can't speak for the coffee, so we can agree to a not to exceed.
Correct.
And $25,000, that's what all I would feel comfortable doing without speaking with them.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. I
Right,
think
okay.
open space, I mean, this is not a big project, and I think within the next 2 years, we should be able to get this done.
I'll ask real quick. The phone.
No, we want to hear that conversation.
Well,
I'm good
wanna
with
wait
it
for
too, George.
Glenn to get back, are you? Okay, Steve has a question, Glenn.
So just a comment, I think setting a firm number not to exceed 25,000, I think we should set it at that and stick with that. If the cost is lower than that, they don't have to pay as much.
Right.
If it takes 5 years for the open space and trails to build the trail and it costs more, it's not the applicant's fault at all. It's open space and trails' responsibility to try to do the trail within a reasonable length of time. And they also have possibilities of using more volunteer labor and stuff to reduce the cost of it. So all that is a way they might not hire a contractor to do parts of it, just rely on volunteer labor, and that
Right.
could bring the cost down within the estimates too.
Right.
Okay, you had a conversation with Lenny, is there anything
Yeah,
you want to share?
Lenny
We're-
was-
Separate, okay,
Good, okay,
All
okay,
right.
good.
Not to exceed 25,000.
Not to exceed.
okay. We're,
I
seem to
can
be
live with
okay
that.
with that? All right, I can live with that. Okay, let's keep going. What else you got?
Well, that was it. With regard to the amended changes to the reso, I think the board still needs to, the decision before you is the vesting, the period of vesting. As I said, we don't need to amend the reso for that. And staff is still recommending approval.
Can I ask a question before we go into that, just regarding the signage? We're paying for the sign, the design of the sign. You had a image that you, like a mock-up. I just wanted to do a quick review of that, if I could.
Can you really do that?
Take your time.
I think so.
Don't rush. Uh-oh.
It's always just a battle. So what are we trying to find this time?
We're gonna look at the interpretive sign, if that's what it's called.
While they're looking, there is another place, Leslie, on the recital, on page 127, under 12, where it says vesting right of 6 years.
I was looking at that too, and that's attachment A, I think, from an earlier thing. And if you look on page 136, is another copy of the resolution that has,
Let's just make sure
10
when we
years.
decide on the vesting, it's clear all the way across the board, wherever
Right.
vesting
Yeah.
is mentioned.
Right, so on the reso, that was in your packet, the recent reso, not the rest of the attachments.
Okay.
But,
On the front, it says 10 years, on the back, it says,
so the
6 years.
recital number 12 says 10.
Okay.
That's the one where,
page 136 of our packet.
yeah, I'm on that.
Yeah, the ones that's pulling up on the, online
Is,
has 6.
says 6.
I have 10 on page 136.
So, also the word beyond is
There's
still
10.
in there on recital 12, or the
Beyond
condition
10
12.
years, you're right.
the beyond
So
needs
it's
to
not
be said.
beyond, but
No.
it's beyond 3 years.
Granted extended vested
Yeah.
rights for 10 years.
For 10 years, yeah.
There you go. This is gonna be the sign.
Yeah.
We can go back and talk about the
I'm not
rights
sure I
now
have the
on
right
that.
reso here either, but we should put the vested rights language in the now therefore part instead of the recital.
'Cause it's in
In
the
the now
recital
therefore part, it
twice.
says until 2025, in what I have.
Me too.
Okay, so we need to clear that up.
Yeah, I apologize.
So look at
My number
farther
7 in my
on
reso,
Page 1. If you can
vested
get
rights to
page
2029.
All right, so
10 years.
I'll leave it to you guys to figure out what it has to.
Let's wait when we get to a motion.
You
we'll-
guys
We didn't wanna
decide what
approve
it's
the
gonna
wrong
say.
Let's figure out how many years we're giving them.
Now, that's probably attachment
Right.
page. Go to the
All right,
top of it,
why are
it'll
we
say
looking at this?
I wanted to bring this back up, only because if you're gonna make a big sign like this, the value of the old historic black and white photo is so much
The red
higher than a contemporary photo. I was just gonna ask you to switch those, because the black and white is gonna really have information that people will be interested in, compared to what it looks like today, which could be the small picture. That was my 2 cents
So you
worth.
want the black and white in the big side and the
Big and
green one in the
it'll
little
be cheaper to
side?
produce and it'll last longer.
Well, Greg, I think that's a good idea. And it's interesting because Jesse and I met with this morning to talk about this, and what she
And
suggested
she's
was.
for or against? Who's pro and who's
He
con?
wants it in hot pink and.
No, Jesse said,
But-
when you're up there looking across the valley, you see this already. So she says this should be reduced in size just as a comparison with how well it's preserved compared to 1940. And then put some more historic photos in here, because that's really the thing that's noteworthy, just what you
In other
said.
words, why give a picture of what you're looking at already?
Yeah, why do it, exactly.
I'm always drawn to the oldest picture.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So
I'll
we're
shut
gonna
up then.
rework it like that, at your
Is that
suggestion.
Jesse's
of old
suggestion or
Jesse's.
yours?
Jesse.
Oh,
Do you like
I
the
knew
font?
she was
You
brilliant.
want the font changed, or you like the font?
Pass that on.
If there are any photos of people actually skiing down the ski run, that would be a neat one to show, which
Oh,
I
if you're
don't
gonna
know
have
if there
photos.
are, but it,
No, we don't want to give people any ideas, because they're not supposed to be skiing down.
Really?
We could ski down, but when you hit the road, it'd be
It
tough.
could have been rough.
Okay, thank you. That's all. I didn't want to distract you too much, but apparently I have. Okay, so we need to clarify the the vested rights. And once a motion, can we do that with the
No,
first?
no, let's,
Oh, it's a public hearing. Thank you for bringing
I'm
that back.
comfortable with extending, because George made a very brilliant request, asking the applicant to consider funding the trail construction. I think we're clean on that, and I think a vesting of 10 years is more than appropriate for this parcel.
George?
This is a pretty amazing parcel in terms of a conservation PUD. When you think about it, we have preserved a historic ranch amenity that really started the ski industry in Aspen. We've got conservation easements on a parcel that is really just a gem on the Castle Creek that we would hate to see that ever be developed, the Castle Creek parcel. We've got public trails. And we've done all this with the applicant's help, and Glenn and Sarah and Lenny, without using any TDRs, without using any open space and trails money. It's pretty amazing. And when we think about what we went through with the Redstone Castle, we ended up giving them more TDRs than I would have ever given them. We gave them a 10-year vesting right. And that's a commercial property. For me, this is an incredible opportunity for the county to have worked with the applicant and their staff to preserve. And so for me, and paying for the trails, which was part of the deal, I think a 10-year vesting is appropriate.
I thought you were gonna go for 20, George.
No, never. But think about what we did. Yeah, think about the the brain damage we did with the Redstone Castle, and this is, and then we gave them TDRs, and we didn't. I mean, this is a much.
Couldn't reason.
Yeah, a much.
I think you're absolutely right. It is. You just, I mean, it's an incredible parcel. We've been driving it by for how many years for those of us who, and just going, oh, what is all that about, you know? And now to actually been able to tour it and see it and live it and breathe it, you know, it's really unique. And one of those projects you're really, kind of really proud to be part of. So thank you.
Kelly?
Thank you. Yes, I feel actually really grateful to have been able to go inside and tour the lodge. So thank you to the owners for facilitating that opportunity to be able to see it as it looked many years ago. I do just want to point out that, you know, we have transferred some square footage from other parcels that are being preserved onto the parcels that are being developed. And so there is that opportunity for the owners to expand their opportunity there. The incremental approach to gaining more public benefit for the additional vested right wasn't where I was coming from in wanting to preserve the 6-year vested that we initially discussed. You know, as I mentioned in the last meeting, if nothing changes between now and 6 years, I don't see having, you know, I can't imagine that there would be any reason to not extend a vested right if that's requested, but you know, I still support the 6-year vesting, and it's not enough to cause me to deny support for this project being different from however the rest of the board feels on that. Thanks.
Steve?
So, I really like all the outcomes we've come up with. I think it's a win-win situation on many fronts here. I totally support the 10-year vesting period. I've always been in favor of longer vesting periods on big parcels of land, because if you have a say we did a 3-year vesting period, that would be an incentive to the landowner to real quickly go in and do all of the things, maybe without thinking long enough and coming up with the best outcome. You make a longer vesting period, slow the process down, the land stays like it is for a longer period of time before actually being changed. And I think that's to the community benefit. And then it gives the landowner a longer time to come up with really the best plan for the development. So I agree with all what the other commissioners have said on this, and I'm happy to see this going forward today.
That's right, it is public hearing.
It's a public hearing. So we're gonna open this to public hearing. If anybody, don't see anybody who wants to come up unless Lenny has to, he's tight-lipped back there.
Would you be willing to reconsider the conundrum parcel?
Yeah, I know, it's like kind of a love fest here, don't get carried away.
Can we close the public hearing quickly?
Can we close the public hearing? He wasn't in a microphone.
You're a good advocate.
Only if we can put a chairlift in.
So Greg, if I may?
You may.
I would like to make a motion to approve this application before us with amended language regarding the trail construction, the camping language, and the cost of not to exceed $25,000. And also to clarify the language under vesting for 10 years, changing the wording from beyond to 4. And I don't know if there are any other amendments I want to make sure to include in this motion.
Well, does your motion include my additional 1, 2, and 3 paragraphs language?
Well, yeah, and that was kind of amending your language in one to include the camping, the clarification
So number 1 is paying for the cost of the trails, not to exceed $25,000, and camping during construction of the trails by Open Space and Trails crew. Number 2 was the conservation easements on the
Right.
ranch parcel and boundary. And number 3 was prior to recordation of the site plan.
The conservation easement, right.
Right.
Including the language as Leslie brought forward to us as part of this
For the
application.
conservation easement.
Right.
As proposed by Open Space and Trails and Sarah.
Yes.
Okay, that's our motion. We have a motion.
Second.
We've got
I'll third it.
two-thirds, second
You
and a
seconded.
third. For further discussion,
I'm good.
the only thing I was going to bring up is a very quick story. I'll be very quick. 1936, when the first skiers came in and
born
arrived
yet.
in town, I'm told this because I wasn't here, Mr. Tidwell, who had the Mesa store, saw the skiers arrive in town and he said, "That's it, we're leaving. This place has gone to hell."
It's kind of like Tidwell and Bert Bidwell,
Not
who's
Bidwell.
the
Bidwell
hippies
came
have come
later,
to town.
right? Yeah, same deal. But so then they moved to Crystal because he had grub staked all the miners, and he ended up owning the town of Crystal, and they owned that for until recently. Their family owned that. But that was the quote. It's like, okay, skiers are coming. This place is ruined. And then Highland Bavarian, and see where it's gone since then. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming in.
I just want to make one comment. Thanks to the commissioners and the staff for working with us, and thank you to Bruce and Matt Coffey, who
yeah.
really have been exceptional owners in caring for this property, and for Lenny, Sarah, and I working for them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Our thanks to the coffees as
And
well.
we're glad that slide didn't come all the way over and down. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Okay, thank you. All right, the last thing up as we usher the last group out. Thank you all for coming. Nice to see you. Ordinance approving the Sunfire Ranch Open Space Master Plan.
I'll make a motion to continue to 11:20.
Second.
And all in favor?
I got
Aye.
a question.
You
This
have a question? Oh.
is public hearing too. We need to see.
Oh,
it.
we know. See? Caught me again.
We need to close all
I
the
had a
public hearings.
question. Let me just see, Suzanne, I was just curious why we're continuing it also. I looked like I thought that was going to be a pretty heavy day, but
11:20.
Yeah, the 20th is going to be big for everything else that's on the 20th.
So, question
Want you to
two,
earn your
we're
turkey.
continuing it because we're still finalizing, we just went to the Open Space Board
This is what I mean. You just
not that long ago.
cancel
I'm not sure what date that was, in October.
October
So we
17th.
got the recommendation from the Open Space Board
Can you pull up the 11:20 agenda?
recently, so now we're finalizing basically the documents to bring forward to you.
yeah.
So George is concerned it's.
Yeah, well, it looked like we had a bunch of stuff going on.
There's several things. I mean, I know, I think it's the
find
second
it.
reading for the,
First reading for the energy code.
first reading for the energy code, second reading for the land use code, energy amendments, that you heard at your last meeting, Sunfire Ranch.
I get all my information.
Celestial vested rights extension is on there, but that will push again. That is not happening at the next
Okay.
meeting. That will be a continuance.
Okay.
And Mountain Valley, the code amendment, it's
Okay.
kind of
Oh,
been
for
in the
their-
works for a long time, but I don't think that's a
Is
big
that a
time.
two-read or a one-read?
It'll be 2 readings. It's an
Okay.
ordinance. But, so yes, you do have a couple of meaty items, but
We can do it.
I think some, right, like with the
Just
land
pack
use
that
code
agenda.
amendments you've
Just keep
seen on
packing
first
it.
reading
Okay,
already.
We'll be here.
So,
Oh, great. Okay.
We
All
need to
right.
vote on
So
that
I need to open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to speak on this? Seeing no one here, we're going to close the public hearing and all the other public hearings and call the question.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
Now, I will make a motion
Well,
to go into
no,
executive session. Oh,
no.
the open discussion.
Open discussion first. Okay, Steve.
I have 3 items. First of all is the date of the issue of the regular meeting on December 4th or December 5th. Kelly has indicated she's going to come back from CCI on Tuesday night, or can come back. She wasn't planning on staying Wednesday, so if the regular meeting were actually held on Wednesday, December 4th, there would be 4 commissioners there. if we hold the meeting on December 5th, the way the plan is, we would only have 3 commissioners there.
I think we've decided to keep it on the 4th.
No, it was going to be the 5th, Thursday the 5th.
Oh. Because I have a COG meeting that day, but it's our COG budget meeting, because we moved that meeting around because of the holidays. So, but I can call into the COG meeting in the morning and just participate till noon, so. And I will be back from the conference, my conference trip on Monday, so I'll be here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So whatever you guys decide, I'm here.
So does
Because otherwise, on
December,
the 5th, there would just be the 3 of us and
Yeah,
Greg.
4th is fine for me.
Leaving the afternoon of the 4th at some point to go to
so
Denver.
after, yeah, so that, I think, holding it on the 4th makes the most sense to me. There'd be more commissioners here for the
But I don't
regular
know
meeting.
how we've noticed and if we have to amend noticing, John, so I don't know. if things-
You haven't noticed anybody yet?
Oh, yeah, we just need to check with Jeanette to be sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
good suggestion, thank you.
What do you think, John? Because you would be leaving CCI early then, too.
Yeah, that's, and we could drive back even Tuesday night or Wednesday morning and make the meeting, so.
So we're gonna aim for the 4th, or you'll let us know?
Well, I'm taking direction from you guys.
Because then I gotta make plans to go to the meeting in Frisco.
Do you guys know if any public hearings have been noticed for the 5th?
That's what I said, we need to check.
If
that.
there are, you'll have to appear for the 5th, or we'll have to just renotice.
Yeah.
There's well, but if you've decided it on the 4th, how does that work?
You can't call it before it's been noticed.
So I see one land use public hearing.
Just check with Jeanette on what we might need to do in order to do this right.
Great, thank you. Steve, you had a couple others?
Okay, there were 2 letters we received. One was from Miss Mayor regarding her daycare center down in
Right.
Basalt. I think this merits us having a discussion about, a larger discussion. We're trying to encourage daycare centers, and if the taxation on it is at a business rate, that's something that she can't handle, running a daycare center where she's trying to keep the costs down for the people, I think that's counterproductive for us, and I don't know if there would be a way that we could have
State statute, we'd have to address it at the state level.
but if it's for a daycare center, is that a different?
She's a for-profit daycare center is the problem. I've been dealing with Mayor on this for 2 years
Yeah,
now.
all she has to do is just become a nonprofit corporation.
That's, would be her choice,
So,
yeah.
so that could be a solution,
If she can do that by her business plan, we don't know all her business aspects and whether or not she'd be able to do that, but that is one possibility. The other one is, we can't change her tax rate. Now, she's talked with Larry Fight, I've sent her to Larry Fight multiple times, trying to work this out for her. She's looked at all her opportunities and options. Kelly and I talked briefly about it, but you're gonna discuss it on the 19th, when you guys have your work session on childcare.
I don't think this was slated particularly because this is kind of a one-off.
Right. But
I mean,
she wanted it to be, that's
I
why she
do
sent it
consider
to
this sort of a real emerging concern with 20-plus families threatening loss of childcare come next year. And I would like us to just bat around if there's
Oh,
ways
and we
to-
can't subsidize somebody who's a for-profit, so we're really.
Well, and I'm
caught-
not, my outcome here isn't like, let's save Mayor's childcare facility, but let's sort of figure out, is there a way to like figure out how to solve the problem for those families, you know? And what that involves in terms of whatever transition Mayor needs to make with that facility.
Like
you
finding
know?
another place for
I
them to
don't-
go?
Or a provider, or I don't know.
Yeah, or provider, yeah. It's a tough one.
It is very tough.
Yeah, so I think there maybe is a creative solution out there that, to solve this, and maybe not the short-term thing for her, but maybe there is a solution for the short-term for her. If she became a nonprofit, for instance, would be a solution.
You can always call her and suggest that.
Yeah. So.
We've done that.
Should we respond as a board with a letter to her suggesting that as a possibility?
I think we need a broader discussion on it rather than just do it today as part of open discussion.
I don't think it's the board's purview to tell someone how they should run their business.
Not tell, it's a suggestion as a possible solution.
You can suggest it to
I would
them.
I would suggest
Or
you
just
call.
do an
She would-
individual letter. saying-
She would love to hear from you. Have you been over there and walked you've been to the facility?
Yeah, yeah.
I would love to have you come down on call her up, and Fridays are usually a good day for her, or Mondays are quieter, and go in and talk to her about it. I know she would really appreciate that.
Okay, well, I'd be glad to talk with her about.
And just so everybody knows, my daughter runs the Kinder Cottage. She's their director, but this is separate from the hobby farm.
I do
one,
think,
yeah.
I would like to just maybe flag that perhaps we can be prepared to have a discussion in concert with the 19th about, what is our role if we're trying to either in a long-term or emergency type action in helping with this larger question of securing or stabilizing provision of childcare. To me, this is like an example that frames that conversation.
Because it's an exceptional facility.
Great.
Yeah.
I would agree with Kelly.
Yeah.
Okay. And then one last item, there was another letter that Picken County is receiving an award for our recycling efforts.
Is somebody going to that?
Well, it's a meeting, the presentation is in Boulder, or the same day we have a meeting here.
Yeah,
I
it's-
was wondering if maybe Kathy Hall or somebody could go and represent the county.
Yeah, and Kathy is planning on being there. It's actually a press conference to announce it. So I think if there was a possibility, and I know it is a board meeting day, it is a pretty big honor.
I think it's great. We need to really
Kathy
commend
can
Kathy.
be
I think
there.
we should have somebody there in person,
Kathy
even if
can
it's
be
Kathy
not
should
an
be.
elected.
Kathy should be there. Whatever we can do to
Well,
facilitate.
Kathy will be there.
Okay.
The question is does a board member or elected official want to be there?
I think that we're busy. I'm sorry to say it, but it seems like we're busy that day, and it's a long way away. And Kathy, I'd love to see the attention focused on Kathy. If we have agreement on that, that's how I.
It should be like a
Okay, yeah.
level of irony to it. Like on one hand, let's look at our solid waste management and how that helps us with climate change, and then let's
we're all
drive
gonna
all the way
drive to
down.
So I'll drive down there
to
for
celebrate
a
our
party. Yeah.
successes on climate change.
So, yep, John, could you respond with a letter to them just saying that Kathy will be there representing Picken County and will be,
Probably been
may
done.
have a, have a
Be
statement to
celebrating
make
here.
at the press conference.
Okay, any other open discussion? Okay,
Covered it for me.
that's good then. I think we'll move on. We
Now I'll
wanna
make a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of
Purposes of an easement request on county property, CRS 2464024B.
so moved.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Thank you,
246.
Grassroots.
Thanks, Grassroots. This is 11:06.
And then we are here tomorrow at 9